In a world filled with sharks, bears, and killer bees, one man is brave enough to stay indoors to bring you the latest in gaming, movie, and pop culture news. That man is Tom Awesome, and this is the Outside is Overrated podcast.
Hello and welcome to Outside is Overrated, a grown-up podcast about gaming and nerd pop culture. On this show, we discuss video games, books, TV shows, movies, and board games. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Tom Sidlacek, and we've got a great show lined up for you. Today, we're breaking down the FX series Shogun. If you're a fan of samurai culture, you can also catch our monthly Game Club segment in our feed. We're currently breaking down Ghost of Tsushima by Sucker Punch Productions. Joining me for the discussion today are the Hobby Box, Joe Burns.
Heyo.
And Dr. B, Brian Camille.
Hi.
Welcome back to the show, guys. Brian, you haven't been on the main show since our Fallout episode last year. Have you just been pounding the board games and interactive novels, or what?
No. I've been playing some Marvel vs. Capcom 2 still due to the Fighters compilation coming out from Capcom, which has been a blast. It brought a lot of new people into the scene, but there's clearly people that have still been playing since '98.
You love MVC too.
It's a lot of fun. We're now existing in a time where I can play against really other people in an easy way. When I first learned to play that game, it was PS2, and you really couldn't play other people. There wasn't a lot of online connectivity at that time.
But you played in your dorm. Isn't that how your entire friend circle developed?
Yeah. After a couple of rounds, most people quit. Because if particularly with Tekken and Marvel vs. Capcom, I played the crap out of them. So
and I played Smash against you. It's not a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I'm just not going to do it again.
Yep. And did you see how long that lasted? That's exactly what happened then. It's just like, okay, 3 matches, okay, we're done. The only one that we kind of stuck with together as a group was Soul Calibur because we all didn't know that, so we kind of came at the same level. But other than that, Marvel Rivals. How this has not caused a lawsuit for intellectual property theft, I have no idea.
From Overwatch?
Oh my lord. They took, even the announcer sounds like Overwatch. It is crazy to me. So I've been playing a lot of that with friend of the show Scott, friend of the show Billy. We've been just loving
I'll determine
that.
Who's friends of the show?
Say what?
I'll determine who's friends.
Okay,
of the show.
okay. Maybe acquaintances, depends on what level of Patreon they're at.
Former co-host.
former co-host.
Maybe future.
But there is something interesting with Rivals. Have you guys heard about how their bots work in that game? Have you heard about this?
No.
I hear that they're just meat for you to slaughter, which I heard from you in our nerd chat.
Yes, but here's how it works. They will put you in a game against bots, but not tell you. They're not sure how the algorithm works, but if it is pretty consistent, if you have 2 bad games where your team gets kind of pounded or even sometimes not that bad of a loss, they will not tell you, put you into a game where there are 2 bots on your team of 6 on the other team, and then you wail on computers, and you don't know they're bots because they give them usernames, they give them all this crap until you look online to see what your fight log was, and then you find out that match that you went 22 and 0, yeah, you played a bunch of bots, but they don't tell you that they're doing this, and I don't know how I feel.
So they use other usernames. Do they copy usernames that exist, or they have made up a bunch of fake users?
Yeah.
So eventually, if you see certain things, you would recognize.
You can kind of recognize it if the names, if it's a lot of Japanese characters at times. Okay. Typically, it's bots, or if it's completely nonsensical. But you always can kind of tell if you're playing humans because if MILF Hunter 69 is on the other team, yeah. You're like, oh, that's a human. That's a real one.
Maybe that's how they're outthinking you.
I don't know.
Developers are a step ahead.
But I feel, should I be upset about the pandering? They're like, oh, we're really sorry you got killed. We're gonna not tell you. Let you play against the AI and go from there.
It's really clever because I've been in Overwatch situations where you just get pounded repeatedly.
It sucks.
Frustrating.
Oh yeah.
So I think it is an interesting and innovative idea that they're inserting a way to try to boost your self-esteem.
And I can see it from that point, right? Because at least even if you kill the bots, Billy doesn't care. Billy's like, yeah, we killed him. This might have been bots. Billy's like, I don't care. That felt good. And maybe that's just what I have to do. But I've never played a game that does that, and they do it in kind of a clandestine way. So I just thought that was kind of it's been an interesting experience.
Well, like, if you knew that you're going into a match against bots, would you just, like, log off and say, oh, I'm good for the night? Or, like, how would you approach it then if you knew that you weren't facing human competition?
I would say the difference winds up being is the bots are simplistic enough to the point where you can essentially play in very stupid, inefficient ways, and
Sounds like it's perfect for me, bro.
Yeah, Tom, this is your mode, and you can roll it. But the problem with the bots is, like, I think it can help reinforce bad habits. So it just kind of depends. I think there's a place for it. I wish you could kind of turn that option off or on, because there might be nights that I would like to have that on. After a couple cocktails, it may be a better choice to play some bots. But it's just interesting.
Well, are there ranked matches and things like that?
Yes, and in ranked there are no bots.
Okay,
so if you want to do that, you can absolutely. And ranked is a sweaty place.
I mean, it makes sense for that type of game, but that would be the avenue you could go in
100%.
if you just wanted to really avoid all of that.
Yep. And if ranked didn't exist, I think this would be a much greater topic to talk about. Yeah. But in quick match, it's a quick match, right? But it's wild because I've never had that where the game's like, sorry about you losing once badly. Let's let you just feel good. Like I went 40-2, and I'm like, yeah. And I looked on my tracker online, everything was bots. I'm like, oh. So.
Yeah, I think it's a cool tool for casual players.
Unique.
Well, and it makes sense. So it reminds me of an anecdote that I think Jake mentioned on the show. Otherwise, I heard this from somebody else that had talked to people that knew. But at Fantasy Flight Games, when they got the license to do Marvel Champions, their previous LCGs were the Lord of the Rings LCG and the Arkham Horror LCG. And those were known to be just like, they will beat the crap out of you mercilessly. And they were told when they were like creating the prototype for the game to present to Marvel, it's like, this can't be like those other ones. It needs to be approachable to other people. And so it makes sense then that Marvel Rivals would try to be like that, something that's a little bit more user friendly for people, as opposed to maybe what Overwatch does or how some other maybe more sweaty games approach things.
I remember, and we'll kind of leave this topic after on this. I remember playing Overwatch with some of you guys, and at that time, the console players, for whatever reason, did not have aim assist. And so we're playing with some PC players. Now, if you're playing with PC players, it's such a different beast as is. In Rivals now, you can choose to play against console people only, which is also a really nice option. But I remember there was a Widowmaker at the back of the level. There is nothing we could do to deal with her. Nothing. She's headshotting the group as we walk forward, and it wound up being a pretty decisive loss pretty quickly because we could do nothing to change our fate. And it was just demoralizing.
So who are what characters do you gravitate towards?
I started using Punisher because he's like Soldier 76, right? He was pretty easy. Scarlet Witch, which is very simple because she's kind of like, is it Morgana? No, or whatever the character in Overwatch that is like an auto lock that drains you. So you don't have to aim. It's very simple to use her. I've been getting into Squirrel Girl. I've been using some of the healers now too. Cloak and Dagger. I use Thor. Definitely the tanks kind of take a little bit more of a challenge because if the healing isn't good, it's just generally a miserable experience. And there is they don't queue particular archetypes. So you can have 5 people that are doing DPS, but they did make the healers enough, not hybridized DPS, but they made them solid enough. They may have to nerf them that they can handle a lot of DPS on their own.
Okay.
But there's a lot of times though that you're still you're desperately. I'm watching Scott switch off whatever he wants to do to be a healer, and Scott will do that for the team, and it drives him nuts how many people don't.
Yeah, I mean, I dabbled with it for like an hour, and that's about it. And
Join us.
played
Come
through
on.
some
Play
of the
with
tutorials,
us.
so we'll have to see. We'll see what
Okay.
happens. I've got a lot of Ghost of Tsushima to play here yet.
All right.
The next few weeks, but maybe after that, we'll see what happens.
Please let us know. We'd love to have you.
Yeah.
I like the flexibility of being able to choose who you are and not being locked into like a team composure. That's where I fell off of Overwatch, was when they forced someone to play a tank, someone to play a healer, and certain numbers of DPS. I like the fluidity of being able to deal with the situation at hand. If you need more healing, you can switch to that. If you need more DPS, I like the flexibility of adjusting mid-match.
And not everybody knows all the characters. That's the challenge. So, like, if you need a tank or you're being forced to play a healer and you don't know it, well, you're learning in match, and you're gonna have to learn anyways. But sometimes, if you're particular casual players, let them play who they're comfortable with.
And just a quick ancillary note on Marvel Rivals. I've discovered a new game within a game. Something that I truly enjoy that is making me very happy at night. The last couple of nights, Phoenix and I have either been watching Shogun or playing Children of Morta right before bed. And as I log off, I'm like, oh, Brian's on Rivals. Great. I know what to do now. And I just start messaging him. And it's great. Just a bunch of asinine comments. So, Brian, my question for you, is it just awesome being friends with me or what?
It can be, because the last night you said something about focus. Like, you need to focus or something. And it was right after Scott and I had a demoralizing match where we just got pounded in the dirt. And that came up on the results screen. I'm like, what? I told Scott that, and Scott just goes, is he spectating you? I'm like, I don't know. And then you sent me boobs.
Yeah, no, it was a reference to the night before when you accused me of costing you a match with my messaging.
Just kept sending them. I'm like, who wastes this much time? Tom's over there slowly clicking on letters. I'm just like, man, you've got too much free time.
I mean, it was over 2 minutes, so yeah, I've got 2 minutes to annoy my friends.
I always appreciate that, Tom. Always.
Yeah. Be surprised what Casey would do with 2 minutes. Before we launch into our main show, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Premier Health. Check out their website at premierhealthmn.com. That's premierhealthmn as in Minnesota.com. If you enjoy our personalities, you can follow the show or us as individuals on social. You can support the show at patreon.com/OiO. You can also follow us on social by emailing the show at overratedpod@gmail.com. You can find me at TomSidlogicOiO on most platforms. Follow Burns at HobbyBoxBurns on X and twitch.tv/HobbyBoxBurns. You can also follow the show at facebook.com/OutsideIsOverrated. So now we're going to launch into our discussion of Shogun. Shogun is a 10-episode FX series following a fictionalized version of the first European interactions in Japan. It is based on James Clavell's novel of the same name and takes place in the year 1600. There is no shortage of popular media set in this era, so I just wanted to start by talking about our combined appetites for samurai media.
I don't think for myself I ever had anything that was really specific to samurai. I think ninja are a very overplayed thing in video games from us all growing up, from Ninja Gaiden to Shinobi to everything else.
Never played them.
Yeah, really? Ninja Gaiden, you talk about how much you hate old games. This, you would hate it. I mean, the fact that enemies respawn when the screen scrolls there, it's hard. But I didn't really have anything too much for samurai that was close to my heart until we got to high school. And I don't know who it was, but it was somebody in our friends group had read Shogun from the Mora library. I wound up getting my hands on it, read it, fell in love with it. I stole the book. It's on my nightstand now. Kelsey brought it to me because we're going to be in Puerto Rico here next month for a wedding, and I'm going to probably read it again. But I wound up stealing it, and I finally remembered, Tom, who the teacher was. It was Mrs. Schumacher.
Oh.
I believe she was our 11th grade, political science teacher or something like that, or civics, I think is what it was. And oddly enough, she saw me reading the book, and she borrowed me the entire 1980s mini saga, which she had taped on a VCR off the live broadcast. Oh, yeah. The amount of bald caps.
Yep.
Just wild.
Yep.
But that was kind of my introduction, and it was really funny because I had come across this book that I didn't know much about. It kind of opened my eyes to falling in love with parts of Japan culture that I guess I didn't really know much about in that sense, and how it kind of transcended some of the relationships I had. I had a teacher that was talking to me about this book on their own personal level, and as an 11th grader, it's kind of different because you think your teachers sleep in coffins in the bottom of the school, and that's where they exist, but she's a real person, and she really liked this book. So it was really fascinating. And in 2011, I ordered a copy of Shogun to the Mora High School library. I didn't say where it came from or who it was for, but I bought it to kind of even out my karma. So hopefully they got it.
Well, with interest, and you've thrown in a bunch of things, let's take a look back at technology for a second. Our teacher recorded it off of TV on a VCR. How old do you have to be to remember what a VCR is and just that functionality and the thought that you wouldn't just go on to Netflix and go boop stream?
And she got it. That broadcast was in the 80s, but I don't know if it was early 80s or late 80s, but it looks like early to mid 80s. This was probably about when we were born. So if she recorded that around 84, 85, I was 2 years old. But the fact that she was so excited to have me watch it, was just kind of it was a neat thing, and it's something that I kind of hold to still.
Yeah. And Brian, I asked you to be on the show because I thought you had an affinity for samurai, so I'm 0 for 1. Burnsy, is this in your wheelhouse, or are we all just fumbling in the dark here?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had a pretty big affinity for feudal Japan and, and samurai, and even though it's like one of my favorite settings, and I have like a ton of plastic miniatures for a couple different game systems for different samurai things that, are just sitting there collecting dust until we get to some random day in the future. I decide to put them together and maybe paint them.
Until COVID-2 comes, right?
Yeah, COVID-2.
We're all stuck at home.
Yep,
Come on, bird flu!
COVID-2 electric boogaloo.
Hey, we're out of the who. Anything could happen now, man.
It is true. But, and I can't remember if Shogun was what fueled that. There was a few other things around that time, and I started watching anime similarly around that time, and so Japan was always kind of interesting to me regardless. But I feel like this definitely fueled my enjoyment of samurai a bit as well. But even though I really like samurai, it's not there's still lots of different like Kurosawa samurai movies and other Japanese samurai movies, and lots of different samurai games and stuff that I've never experienced because I don't necessarily seek it out, even though I enjoy the aesthetic and I enjoy like the time period and sort of the whole just sort of a country at war and all these different people fighting for dominance of different parts of the land. I always find that a super interesting concept. So yeah, I enjoy samurai a lot. So you're 1 for 2 now, I guess.
All right.
So yeah, we'll take that.
Overall, we're 1 for 3 because like samurai swords are cool, right? Like everyone likes a good samurai sword, and I have worn a kimono to prom, so like I'm great. But my overall interest in like Japanese culture has always been just very low. Like, and I knew nothing about feudal Japan, so like this was a whole like unexplored part of the world and time of existence for me, which is kind of cool. And as we launch into it here, I'm going to introduce something new to our fans, the OiO drinking game. I am notorious for butchering words of all languages on this show, but I know with actors' names, locations, different things tied to this, it's going to be a rough go. So every time I mispronounce a word, a place, a name, anytime I mispronounce something, I want you guys to call it out so that our fans can take a drink every single time.
Are you sure
Marako-sama.
I was going to say, you could lose...
Engine!
Like, the patrons could, like, end up dying from this.
There's liability that you really haven't thought about here. This is like hold your wee for a wee. Do you remember how that ended?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying, like, maybe not take a shot every time, but, like, take a drink of whatever's in front of you. It's the My Name is Earl drinking game.
Let's get him hydrated. Good plan.
Most of this podcast is going to remain spoiler-free. We'll give a very clear spoiler warning before we discuss any narrative spoilers. Here's what we plan to discuss during this episode. What we learned about Japanese culture, the most compelling characters in Shogun, the standout elements of the show, our overall impressions of the narrative, and then we'll wrap up with some spoilers and our thoughts leading into Season 2. Shogun released in 2024 and has a Metacritic rating of 85. The show follows English pilot John Blackthorne as he washes ashore as the first Englishman in the country. There's a healthy dose of political intrigue, there's 5 regents that rule Japan, and the show opens with 4 of them voting to impeach the 5th member, Yoshi Toranaga. You get a look at the female's role within Japanese culture through Blackthorne's translator and consort. You learn about the complicated relationship between Portugal and Japan, as well as the strained relationship, to put it kindly, between Catholics and Protestants and their efforts to conquer the New World. Shogun shows us how the feudal system functioned with daimyo and samurai. So
that was pronounced the daimyo.
Daimyo. Oh, that is okay. Take a drink first off. And
I've been mispronouncing that since 10th grade. Then
daimyo.
Daimyo. So like 10 cents. Yo.
Yep.
All right, great. We're off to a great start. Daimyo and samurai. So Bernsey, what surprised you about this portrayal of Japanese culture?
So. It's kind of hard looking at this from the perspective of having read the book, but I think what surprised me about this series was how much it played out the way that I remembered the book. Now, there's definitely significant differences between the book and how they had to adapt it for the screen. but it's one of those things where it's still just kind of everything just sort of fit into place the way that I had remembered it, being a book that I read like 25-ish years ago, probably. So,
and it's a massive book.
It's 1,100-ish pages.
Yeah, it's not messing around. There's a lot of info in that thing.
Yeah, and it's dense, and there's there's some similarities to like Game of Thrones in it for me, where there's a lot of character names. You're sort of, and since you come into the story following Blackthorn, and it does that similarly within the series, it helps you to sort of onboard you in this like fish out of water. Okay, I'm just trying to keep up, just like Blackthorn is, with who all these people are and what they're talking about, which I think is pretty neat also. But all in all, I think they represented everything in a very faithful way. The showrunners and writers had to sort of play to or honor two different masters in this. They had the people that were fans of the book and, the text of the original novel by James Clavell, but then they also had to play to Japanese history and like the Japanese people if they were going to experience this story, from that perspective. And so they kind of had to develop everything around sort of those two perspectives, which is that's what fostered a lot of the changes that they had to make with this. So like, for instance, one of the big changes is they changed a lot of the names of the characters. And that was because the names that Clavell used in the novel weren't necessarily what would have actually been used in that time frame. So for instance, Fujiko is her name in the book, but her name in the series is Fuji, his Blackthorn's consort. And the reason why they made that change is that Ko usually, even though that's like popular now to be the ending syllable for a lot of feminine names, that wasn't the case back in like 1600s Japan. And so they changed a lot of names because of that. And just for other different reasons to make them fit a lot more in the historical context, a lot more than like Clavell would have done. And I think one of the other really interesting aspects of this is the translation process that they went through. Did either of you watch or listen to the podcast at all?
I did not.
Yeah, so they put out a podcast that basically it's a 10-episode podcast. Each episode is a companion to one of the episodes within the series. And so their translation process was the writers would write it in English because none of their writers were Japanese speakers. And then they would work with basically translators in Tokyo to get notes as to, characters maybe wouldn't have said certain things this way. And then they'd make changes. And then they'd send it off to a translation team that would take that and translate it into modern Japanese. And then they would take that and send it off to a playwright who specializes in writing text for that time period in Japan.
Lord.
And he would go through and he would then write it to sound more the way that they would speak back then. And then the subtitles would be translated off of that text. It wouldn't be just what they wrote in the story. And so there's some really interesting things that changed through that process, which also I think helped it stay true to historically and from a Japanese cultural perspective, especially of that time, to have it actually make sense. So I think that was one really cool way that they took this text and they adapted it from what Clavell did, but then it went through all of these different
filters,
processes to get it to make it sound more genuine, or at least historically what is regarded as accurate to that culture.
But how awesome is that they made that decision? Because it's a decision that added a lot of grind to it, and you don't make that decision unless you truly care about what you're doing.
Yeah,
that is an incredible amount of extra work they gave themselves, because a lot of we all here watch anime. Some of the translations that come through, they might have used Google Translate, and they're like, whatever comes out, just type that in. It's just like, oh my lord.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we've played video games before, and all your base do belong to us, or whatever it is.
God, yes.
There's some this guy are sick. Like there's some very bad translations that happen out there. But a lot of that was because they had producers that were Japanese on the show, and so they wanted to make sure, and especially Hiroyuki Sanada, who is the actor who plays Toranaga, was a main producer on the show. And so he played a lot of a role of making sure that so much of this tried to stay true to what that time period would have been in Japan and to represent that as accurately as possible.
That's fascinating. And to have the foresight to budget and plan out that entire process is wild. It makes me think of an anecdote from my time working in baseball. When I was working for the Orioles AA affiliate, they signed their first Japanese minor league player, and they sent him to Bowie, and they didn't plan for anything else around it. So,
oh no!
Yeah, it was a Japanese player, Yohi Tanaka, didn't speak a word of English, and the Orioles didn't plan for anything. So like, nobody on the team could interact with him, and so like it is difficult to find a Japanese translator on short notice in the DC areas. Like, I called the Japanese consul, and they said, no, we're not going to help. But apparently it made the rounds internally, and somebody from the consulate showed up like at the door of the office and said, yeah, I'll translate. Okay, so I brought this stranger into the clubhouse and was able to do the first interview with an Orioles Japanese minor league player.
How off-putting that too is if you're the player and you're coming in, and it kind of a little bit like John Blackthorne when he gets here. He has no concept of the language, nothing, and you're just trying to exist through it. Like, that has to be so lonely and so isolating to not even be able to convey how you feel.
And it was interesting watching the other players interact with Yohi, because Google Translate was like the main tool, and like our first baseman put in a very crude statement and played it for him, and then he made a little hip thrusting motion, and they shared a moment because it was hilarious.
So, speaking of that, sorry, we'll stop going off of tangents here. There was a video I saw yesterday on the internet because, Ichiro just got, inducted in the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame, and it was a Bob Costas interview that he was doing with Ichiro, and he asked him what his favorite expression, English expression is, and he starts laughing immediately, and then he composes himself, and he says, in Kansas City, it is hotter than 2 rats in an old sock. And there was some other choice language that I left out of there about what the 2 rats were doing. But Bob Costas just loses it. The entire crew is laughing, and it's just like, it's just so funny to have that. But yeah, I mean,
my practice has and I'll keep this part short. My practice has a doctor who, when she moved here 6 years ago, didn't speak any English at all. Spoke only Spanish. She wound up taking her boards. She wound up taking anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, all these classes in a second language as she was mastering it at the time. But the English language has so much weird nuance. We were talking to a patient, and they're talking about having a Charlie horse. And she's agreeing, and we're all agreeing, and we're all talking together. And then we leave the room, and the doc comes up to me, and she's like, what is she talking about? What about the horse? And I'm like, no, it's like a muscle spasm. And I'm like, now that I think about it, that is a really dumb old term. But like, she legit thought we were talking about like something with like a horse for like a couple of minutes, and she was just lost trying to figure out what the hell's happening.
She's just really concerned about his horse.
Super weird, but English language is just odd, and to anyone that has to learn it, I'm sorry, we've ruined it.
And going back to Japanese culture, Brian, what surprised you, or what did you learn about Japanese culture from watching Shogun?
It was maybe I learned it more from the book, but like the show does a really good job with it as well. The amount of formality and that Japanese culture has to endure, from everything from arguing to how you approach a dinner table to have a meal with those that are around you, to the brutality of it, because the dichotomy is kind of wild, right? There's a friar early on that explains to John Blackthorne, he's like, there's only really one punishment here, and it's death. Like, that is it. So you have all of these people that almost like step over themselves in an attempt to be polite, and people speaking out of turn have to commit seppuku. Yep. It is crazy just how much that their country is driven under how they approach things, from just the formal nature of language to their daily rituals, and it is wildly I don't want to say bad manners, but it's like essentially forbidden to break from these traditional standards, and there is heavy rules if you do. Like, that was wild to me.
Well, and that's one of the things that's evidenced very early on in the first episode with, the one character that during this entirely huge formal meeting of the regents, where, his master is basically getting shamed, and he just can't take it anymore and takes a step that is completely forbidden.
Yeah, he says, stop, just please, stop talking about him like this, and that's enough. That's it.
Yep, and then and he has to kill himself and his only male heir, and so it's like it was a baby, by the way, so that's just
a newborn baby, and
brutal.
That was shocking, and as a parent, you would not pry that child away from me. I would stab anybody that tried to remove the child from my arms, like Fuji did.
Yes. And so it's really interesting. It's really interesting to see that. Now, granted, current Japanese culture, isn't going to be like that. But there are some of those formalities for sure because those are kind of rooted within the language itself. But then there's also just business culture. I think in Japan has kept a lot of that formality type of thing. And everything along those lines too. So there's some of that stuff that's carried forward. I don't think anybody's really referred to much as sama in current Japanese culture. Maybe to some extent, if you really wanted to honor somebody.
Well, let's bring the sama back, Burn Sama.
All right, the Tam Sama
and Brian San.
Oh,
I just thought that the disregard for human life was really jarring. I am a person who treasures human life. I hate President Trump with a burning, fiery passion, but I don't think that he should be assassinated.
Yeah.
I don't think that anything warrants the taking of human life.
Should he commit ritualistic seppuku, though? That's the question.
I have a strong feeling on that I'm not going to share on the air.
That's probably smart.
Yeah. Well, here's a fun exercise. Let's put President Trump into Shogun and see just how many times he gets...
Gosh, just imagine him as black. That's like an SNL skit for you.
He wouldn't get past the shore. He'd be put to death pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Nasty samurai. Nasty.
He's like the worst samurai. One of the worst samurai I've ever seen. I've not seen many, but he's one of the worst.
Hey, you don't even peed on once, right?
That's true. He would have enjoyed that.
I don't know, I'm just speaking from the internet.
This Omi guy, he's not so bad. Yeah. Not so bad. Likes the showers that are a little golden,
It'll be a very nice
Eats a little too much asparagus, but...
Shogun is very much a period drama. The lead roles were played by, and buckle up here, folks. Get those drinks ready. Cosmo Jarvis as John Blackthorne. All right, 1 for 1.
Nailed it.
Anna Sawai as Toda Mariko. Mariko. Right,
Either
just pronounce it
works.
2 different ways.
Either works.
Tadanobu Asano as Kashigi Yabashige.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Hiroyuki Sanada as Yoshi Toranaga.
Well, you said Toranaga.
Oh my god.
That's one.
Yeah, I don't know. Whenever Phoenix and I talked about the show, we always said Toranaga, so that's in my brain. That's just going to happen. So anytime I refer to the main character of this show, everyone takes a drink. Great. And Takahiro Hira as Ishido Kazunari.
Yeah, see? Yeah, that's easy.
All right. Not so bad.
These were not very hard names. I will say that. But yeah, you did well.
Yeah, and I nailed Cosmo Jarvis. Of course, I'm behind
Cosmo's a great name in general,
Cosmo's
by the way, right?
It's a horrible name. I saw that.
I was like, dang.
Played by Cosmo Jarvis. I don't know, man. It's got this dumb Tom Hardy face.
But to play like a British person, that's a very British name.
Cosmo's British?
Cosmo Jarvis.
Okay, yeah.
At your service.
Yeah. Governor. Brian was the cat. Brian's son was
Brian Kuhn,
because we're close. We're all friends.
Brian Kuhn was the cast of strength of this show.
Yes, and there actually was some worry for me initially because of who played Mariko. I saw her in Monarch. If any of you guys saw the Monarch, it's based off of, it's kind of like a side story of the Titan world of Godzilla, King Kong.
Yeah.
So she is one of these, there's a researcher that is missing they're trying to find, and she's one of the 2 kids. And to be honest, her acting, she struggled. And in her defense, when Kurt Russell also comes across as bad acting in that show, it might be more the writing. So I maybe have to give her a pass for that. But when I saw her end it, I'm like, oh crap, this isn't going to be very good. But fortunately, due to the extremely formal and narrow emotional bandwidth of Japanese culture, she did fine. There wasn't too much that she had to do with it. Toranaga, I thought absolutely stole it. I've recognized him from a couple different things. He was in Bullet Train with Brad Pitt. He's a character towards the end in that one too. But I think he wound up winning. He won a couple of awards for this, didn't he?
Well, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, he won Best Actor at the Golden Globes for it.
For good reason.
Yeah, and as one of the producers, he won for it, winning the Best Drama Series. So. Yep.
So I thought he was so good and cool and calm and collected. Ishido was the gentleman that played him was fantastic.
Yeah.
John Blackthorne is almost like comedic relief. He kind of comes across as like a meathead bro, maybe in a little bit in a way.
I didn't get much of a bro sense from him.
I just felt like when it comes to Blackthorne, and maybe it's just because there's such a wild gulf between Japanese culture and at that time English culture. He was so much less formal. He was so much more casual about just kind of everything. I guess that's where it comes from.
And that's kind of the point. Like, he's a fish out of water,
yes,
right?
Yeah, that's fair. I can give you with that one.
And I think the reason why that maybe stands out a little bit more here than it would have in the book is that being a TV series, you don't get that internal monologue and understanding that you get through the narration in the book. And so I feel like it's a lot harder to connect to him. And he almost ends up not being the main character in some sense.
In the back 4 episodes, he's certainly in the back seat.
And so it makes it really interesting. And I mean, that does sort of tie into the novel because a lot of the other characters near to the end become much more centralized as to what's going on. But it's interesting to see how that is different when you're not getting that internalization and some of the things that they have to do from a writing standpoint to try to show that. And then the actors kind of knowing that background, how they can bring that to the surface if it's not in the dialogue, but just by how you're acting, how you're responding to things. It's a really difficult thing to be able to try to pull off, but I do think the cast as a whole, from top to bottom, was phenomenal.
Oh, even some of the side characters. My wife's favorite character was Rodriguez. He's a Portuguese ship captain with a beard that is like God tier. That thing was full. And just his banter with John Blackthorne. I thought Buntaro, Maruko's husband, for not having a ton of lines, the way that guy conveys like the internal pain he is. Yeah. Oh, he's a brutally sad character.
Yep.
But he is always just beyond himself, like trying to hold in his rage. There was only a couple of people I thought that struggled. I thought that Toranaga's son.
Yeah.
Even for most of, well, really all of his dialogue is in Japanese. Some of how his facial expressions worked, some of how his physical acting worked, I think it was pretty apparent that he wasn't maybe the same level as everybody else. But then again, unfortunately, he's interacting a lot of the time with Toranaga, and Toranaga is dominating it, and you can kind of see the distance there between ability. But it was much more likely that I was impressed with what they did from a casting standpoint than not. And that's just such a compliment.
Yeah, I think when looking at Nagakato, it's a really difficult character, because he's a character that's like trying. It's similar to like the actor, right? You're compared to this really great actor,
finished product.
Yep. Yeah. And then you're like trying to live up to that standard and trying to be in those shoes. So in some extent that actually kind of works a little bit, but I would agree that I think his character maybe struggled a little bit. And it just, the way that he was portrayed and some of the impulsiveness and the whole like trying to be as good as daddy and all of that stuff, it just made it difficult to try to come across as a sympathetic character.
100%.
So I think that is also something that was a little bit more difficult of a role to play compared to maybe some of the other ones.
Well, I think the point was that he was supposed to be a dumb kid. Like, he wasn't on the same tier as his father, and he never would be.
Yep. And then it's part of that is like, because then you get into the whole nature versus nurture. So how much of that is just he's never going to be that? Or how much of that is that maybe he wasn't parented in the way that would have helped him become that, right?
Oh, and Toranaga wins his first battle at, 12?
Yeah.
And that's probably half of his son's age at that time.
Yep.
And he was already doing battlefield strategic things. It was crazy.
I mean, Toranaga is a once-in-a-generation character.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
and
yes.
like nobody else is ever going to live up to that standard.
Is it Minowara? Is his lineage? How
Yes.
do you pronounce that? Minowara.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, they explain that more in the books. That's interesting.
Yep.
Burnsy-kun.
Every time you sound it, it sounds like you're dating him.
Maybe we are.
It'd be more like Burnsy-chan.
Burnsy-chan, which characters did you find most compelling out of this outstanding cast?
So for me, I mean, Toradai was phenomenal. Hiroyuki Sanada is one of the best actors in Japan right now, best Japanese actors in Japan, because I think he's working a lot more in Hollywood now than Japan even. But I mean, he's phenomenal. If you look at any of the behind the scenes stuff that they have on Hulu, like every single person's talking about him in such a reverential standpoint, and it's, deservedly so. But to me, there was two characters that really stood out. The first one was Fuji. And, Fuji is Blackthorn's consort.
Do you want to break down what a consort is?
So the consort is, it's like shy of a wife to some extent. It's like that next level below that.
So I had completely misinterpreted what a consort was. I thought it was essentially a side piece, a high-end prostitute.
That's a courtesan.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
They're almost like the person that runs the estate.
Yes.
And they're like almost like a business partner in certain senses.
Correct.
Well, that's interesting because I just read in the book, it's a Yabu chapter where he's talking with his wife and his favorite consort, and I'm like, oh. And he says specifically, you can have as many consorts as you want, but you can only have one wife at a time. And it's like, oh. Okay, well, that's a little bit differently from how I'm wired, but okay, I'm learning.
Yep. And the wife runs the consorts, right? Like, they just kind of make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to. They are the bottom B, as they say in the pimp culture.
Well, and I mean, that's where you get into, like, the Ochiba relationship with, I can't remember her name, but the old lady.
Taiko's wife.
The Taiko's wife. She was the wife, and Ochiba was the consort, that provided the heir. And so she had more power than maybe the other consorts because she was able to produce the heir for the Taiko. But yes, so that character, her son and husband all die very early on in the show. And so
because he spoke out of turn.
Because he spoke
out of turn.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, and drew his sword kind of indoors in a formal meeting of samurai. Like
he should have died.
Slightly
absolutely, the crime fit the punishment.
So in that world, yes, but yes. So she has so much internal like strife. And then she is sort of forced into this role where she has to serve this foreigner that she can't speak to, can't understand, and can't relate to. And
but he has a huge penis, according to the book.
Yes, they don't really go into that at all here.
The book does.
The book definitely does.
Biggest I've ever seen. Now I can die happy.
Yeah, justifiable that they maybe don't.
You can't see it, but Tom's tapping his forearm. I don't know what that means.
Well, I just flopped the whole arm down on the table. Just bump. Ow.
But I think the thing with Fuji's characterization in the show that makes her stand out more than the book is that, like, she does so much with her facial expressions and reactions. That without saying things, she conveys kind of not just like what she's feeling, but also this kind of outsider but insider's view of Mariko and Anjin's relationship, which I think is also really interesting to see. She's there a lot. She doesn't say a ton all the time, but then also seeing like her relationship with Blackthorn develop and grow as it goes through to the end. Like, you see her change as a character and her relationship with Blackthorn change as the show goes on, and she does a phenomenal job of doing that, I think.
And just how seriously she takes her position. At one point, they try to take his guns, and Mariko goes, hey, just give them to Fuji. Fuji will guard them with her life. And John's not like totally sure on that, but he gives Fuji the guns. And then Fuji gets approached by a samurai, basically going, hey, give me the guns. Fuji instantly aims it at his face and is like, if you want, she's like, I will do this. And John's response to that is so wonderful. He's like, oh, Good. Well done. Well done. How seriously she takes the role. She may not want the role, but she executes it to the absolute maximum of her ability. Yeah, she is a really good character.
And so then the other one for me is Yabu. So Yabushige.
Yes.
So he, like, reading the book, like, you just hate him. Like, I don't know, at least that's what I remember, is just hating Yabu with a burning, fiery passion. And so in the show, I was expecting that to be the case. And I think with Omi, you still get the point where it's like, yeah, he's kind of a detestable character throughout, but there's something about how Yabu is portrayed that, like, you can't not at least somewhat like him as a character, and like the things that he accomplishes, and then how his and Anjin's relationship kind of dovetails into each other a lot. I just think is super well done, and yeah, the actor does a phenomenal job.
I think that Yabu is really interesting because he's constantly playing both sides.
Yes.
And like he takes a very practical approach to this difficult situation, being thrust in between two major lords. Do you think they perhaps had too charismatic an actor for the role? Because like it's impossible not to like him.
No, I think he needs to have that because he needs to play both sides.
Yes.
And the part that's so funny is like halfway through, you're starting to feel for him. Yeah, he dug his grave,
Yeah.
right? He put himself in the position, but there is no way to win.
Yeah.
Both sides are like aggressively trying to like force him to do things, and he's just trying to find a way through.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Well, and it's the interesting aspect of it, and this was something that was apparent in the book, but it popped to me a little bit more in the series, is the similarities to some extent between Yabushige and Blackthorn, in that Blackthorn's just trying to do whatever he can to survive, and his allegiance to Toranaga is there, but it's not as important as his allegiance is to himself. And that's the same with Yabu. In that, he's just trying to get through all of this, and he wants to be on whatever side wins, no matter what.
Well, that's extremely relatable. Like, that's basically how we're wired as human beings,
yes.
right?
Tom, you would be Yabu. Absolutely, I have no doubt that would be you. And the part that's so funny is that every time when somebody calls him out, he, like, finds some genuine, jovial way. Oh, I was forced. I didn't know that was going to happen. Like, he just kind of finds... He basically has to, as you were saying, play both sides.
Yeah.
But at no point does the pressure never comes off him.
Yeah.
It just gets worse
Yep.
as the show goes on.
Yep. And it's that whole, like, have you ever seen Uncut Gems?
Yes.
So it's
where
that
you're just
same
like,
thing.
With Uncut Gems, you're like, please just make one good decision.
Yes.
And it just never happens.
Yep. And it just keeps digging and digging and digging until it gets too deep, right? And I think that's Yabu's sort of character arc through all of this, and it's just done so well, and I think the actor adds a level to that character that just makes him so much more interesting that I don't remember. It's been a long time since I watched the miniseries, but I don't remember from the 80s miniseries with that character.
I watched pieces of it, and he was... Honestly, most of the series wasn't very good. God, is it Chamberlain? What's the name of the main... Yeah, the main actor was... pretty famous. They really didn't do much with the Japanese characters that were from just a casting standpoint, because I think at that time they're probably really it wasn't even interested, they didn't really care. But I remember the narration was Orson Welles.
Yeah.
That was kind of wild to me. Like, okay, so they did pick up some talent here and there, but like this was dealt with so much more thoroughly than the 80s one. But it was a different time.
And the actor that played Toranaga was like the Japanese actor of that time, Ifune. So yeah, I don't know. It's been way too long since I've seen that, but that's the second character, and it makes sense that he won Best Supporting Actor in a Drama Series, because he was just that good. He was phenomenal. So
yeah, Yabu was great. Brian, who stuck out to you?
Yabu was one of mine too. And then, just kind of interestingly enough, like as this kind of series kind of kept going forward, Toranaga obviously dominated the early portion of it. And watching Fuji was on my list is watching her relationship with John Blackthorne and watching how she responds to kindness, which is clearly something she really doesn't understand. And he does these small things for her, and particularly when John winds up giving her swords, her family swords, which kind of have a crappy history to them, to Toranaga to wear, and how that is such a massive thing for Fuji's world. Just for her to have so much heartache early on, and then to wind up in an okay, and at the end, Fuji best nun. I love that, and how they work together. So I had a lot of appreciation for that. But Yabu's probably my favorite overall, outside of maybe Toranaga. I don't know if there's really anybody that can compete, because there's just a lot more going on there. And I don't know, Ishido is a very hateable character, so that's good. That's a positive.
Yeah. My favorite character was a very minor character, but the Portuguese pilot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like the
Rodriguez.
first lifeline that, was it Rodriguez, or was Rodriguez the captain of the black ship?
Rodriguez is the beard.
Is the pilot, yep.
Yeah. Rodriguez, my man. Like, he's a minor character, but he's like Blackthorn's first lifeline in Japan. And like, they start being buddies, and he has a hilarious line. Like, he tells Blackthorn where they're taking him, and Blackthorn's like, "What does Toranaga want with me? Toranaga want with me?" Drink. And I'm not going to repeat what Rodriguez says on the air, but it's hilarious. And then they start to build a relationship, and then Blackthorn tries to jump him, and Rodriguez has him covered. And I thought it was fascinating. Like, they're all buddy-buddy, and then they're at each other's throats. And then the show moves on past him, but I'm like, man, I really loved Rodriguez.
Well, and Rodriguez, was in a very pivotal moment, was like head-to-head against Blackthorn, pitted against Blackthorn, and it would have basically meant Blackthorn's demise.
He saved him.
And he, gave him the space to sort of make the escape that he needed to make out of the harbor. And, that was because even though they were enemies or whatever, they were still brother pilots. And he still had the respect of his want and need to just survive.
But even their banter before the scene, it sounds like too old for it. Doesn't sound that far from how some of the people on the show talk to each other off the mics, and how they're just yelling at each other. And he's like, Rodriguez is like, "I will genuinely miss you when you die."
I want to dig at something you said, Burns. There's the escape scene where Rodriguez saves Blackthorn's life. Previously, Blackthorn saves Rodriguez's life to make sure that he gets rescued. And the show frequently deals with fate. And it poses the question, like, are we all slaves to fate? Is everything predetermined? Or do we have any agency in our actions? And there are several points there where Blackthorn wasn't fated to die because he had previously done this action that bought his life, basically. So let's go philosophical. Do you believe that everything is scripted and that everything is predetermined?
Oh boy, this is like going back to almost a year ago, having this conversation with a few people about free will and destiny and blah 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 blah. I feel like if we're looking at it from the text, I feel like it's the type of thing where there is fate and there is the destiny that a person has.
Are fate and destiny the same thing?
They're similar, at least. And I feel like it's the type of thing where, at least the story that the book is trying to say, is that you still have to take control to make that fate happen in order for it to become a reality. You can't just sit back and allow your fate to happen. You have to, I guess, grab it by the hands.
Rodriguez warns people about Blackthorn, though, too. At one point he goes, "Hey, just to warn you," he's like, "this is not a man who leaves his fate in God's hands."
Yeah.
Like, he will make it happen. And how many times does John say, "I didn't come all the way here to die here. I didn't come all the way to die in this moment." He's unrelenting in that thought process. And I think it winds up actually forcing him through those situations when maybe someone could give up.
Yeah, because I think if he didn't do those things, he would have been where the rest of his crew were, or dead, one of the two. And so I think that's just one of those things where I do think that there is some level of aspect. Now, you could say that, breaking it down chemically, that's your brain doing it, and your, like, what is you, your soul or whatever, isn't actually changing anything, but that's maybe a deeper topic that we can't get into on a show that's about Shogun.
if I can just say one thing that's very short about that, I think that there is something intangible beyond just your brain chemicals forcing you to have your will to survive, because there's a difference with how people can excel in this world. There's a difference certainly in how people survive in this world. And if we're all built with the same chemicals flowing around in roughly the same ratios, that does not explain the gap that we see between some people that can produce certain kinds of maybe legacies and others that can't.
Well, I just thought it was an interesting question to bring up because Mariko-sama says in the show, we live and we die.
Yep.
Everything else is out of our control. And she is completely 100% behind that mindset. And it's made me think a lot. Mariko-sama was my favorite major character in the show. I thought it was really interesting in a war of men, where men are all the samurai depicted. She has a pivotal moment with Toranaga. That is going to be really hard to break.
You have it.
Yeah. She has a pivotal moment with Toranaga where he's trying to ask her what's going on with Ochiban's thinking.
Yeah.
And she
Ochiban
says,
is the mother of the emperor, just as a reminder to everybody.
But yes.
Ochiba, drink. And Mariko-sama says, men go to war for many reasons. For honor, for pride, for whatever reason. She says, women are just at war.
Yeah.
And it's just, I loved Mariko throughout the show, minus one episode, because she has this huge wall that she's cultivated since birth. And she explains the eightfold wall to the audience. Eightfold sense. Drink.
No, that's not
wrong.
That's not mispronunciation. That's just misremembering.
Right.
You didn't say thank. Eightfold thank.
The eightfold thank. Now you can drink. Now it's warranted. And she is so often cast in these unfamiliar, unfriendly, unwelcoming situations at Blackthorn's side, and she deals with all of it with grace and while adhering to the honor that's expected of her. And I just thought, watching her in all these situations that she was put in, it's interesting for Blackthorn in these situations because he's the fish out of water, right? Mariko knows the lay of the land. She knows the formality. She knows the culture, and she is equally uncomfortable in a lot of these situations. And I loved watching her throughout the series to see how the things would play out from her perspective.
She has zero fear of death too. Like that's part of what makes.
Not that she has zero fear. She has 100% welcome of death.
Yeah, that's a difference. That's a better way to put it. She is. And because of that, she gets put into situations that just seem wildly daunting. But she's kind of looking for an out almost in certain ways. Now she definitely sees her servitude to Lord Toranaga as something that even supersedes her own free will to decide what she wants to do with herself. But that tool is extremely powerful, and it's so interesting how so many of the women, it's almost like, I mean, these women are put in boxes and carried on long trips. It's like they're almost possessions in certain kinds of ways. Is it Ochiban?
Ochiba,
which is she is the mother of the emperor. When she starts to exert her will later on, it is fascinating that, like, once she starts to, like, hey, this is how this works, nobody even tries to stop her. It is, it's very interesting how it's very male dominant, but you get certain personalities and they do not mess with her in any way.
Well, because she's representing the leader, right?
Yep.
You know, that can't do that. And even though Ishido technically is, as like the lead of the Council of Regents, supposed to be in that role to an extent, it is her once she finally gets to Osaka. I mean, it is her for sure.
And I love how she, as a character, she just wields that power. She comes across as just cold, and it's very clear that she's not someone to cross.
So we can all agree that the cast is really strong in this show. Beyond the cast, Brian, what was the standout element of the show?
A production value, I would say. Man, just from a lot of CGI has to be used at certain times, right? Particularly when we're looking at like the large scale aspects of Osaka, things like that.
Background stuff, yes, but a lot of like all the stuff on sets were built. Yep. Do you guys know? Did you guys look up how much the series cost to make?
Was it like 25 million, or was it way beyond that?
25 million an episode.
Is that what it was?
250 million total.
Yeah.
Holy cats!
Yeah,
but it's super clear that, like, again, the production value was killer, and just some of the moments of kind of when they do give you some hyper violence. There's some cannon warfare that you'll experience. Just wild.
Am I the only one that's disappointed that the cannons didn't play a role in like the end of the story? It's like it's such a focus and in the like middle tier of the show, and then at the end, like, it doesn't really pay off in any way.
It'll pay off in season 2, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and
I would assume.
And I mean, essentially, they're trying to find a way. It's building up to violence, and the resolve winds up coming through ways that are non-violent.
Yeah,
for the most part. On a grand scale. On a grand scale.
Yes, I mean to as far as the story has gone so far, yes. It definitely, historically, it doesn't stay non-violent. There's lots of people that die because that's what war does. But
and there are some times where you kind of have to look away. This show does not blink at violence. Early on, a member of Blackthorn's crew is boiled alive, and that was seared enough in Kelsey's, my partner's mind, that she knew that was coming. And the second that cauldron came out, she's like, "Can we fast forward this part?" Because she it's a pretty grotesque thing that you see towards the tail end of this life. Because Yabu is essentially likes to watch people die to see if they can give him any kind of understanding to what happens during death. But between that and just between how beautiful the show is able to convey, Japan, for the most part, in a lot of ways, is a really sad place. Mariko talks about how it is a place of death, and Buntaro is deeply sad. Maruko's deeply sad. Fuji and all these people completely rely on their honor and their attachment to customs to push them through when maybe they wouldn't otherwise. I thought that became such a clear tone as the show went on, and man, they we talk about it all the time. They clearly really appreciated the source material, and they did right by it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo the production values. I mean, the fact that they built everything from scratch, made everything from scratch.
The costumes.
Yep.
Some of Toranaga's garments.
Oh yeah,
wild.
Everything was completely made for the show, based off of historical references and descriptions from the book. And yeah, it is so extremely well done. I mean, and it makes sense. They spent $250 million to be able to recreate all these buildings in British Columbia.
Is that where it was filmed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were going to film it in Japan, but they couldn't because of COVID. Because that's when they started filming, was right after COVID happened. So then it was easier to ship everybody over to British Columbia, and then they were able to film it almost all there. They did some landscape stuff in Japan. I think eventually after the COVID lockdowns cleared up. But everything, I think, where you see actors was all in British Columbia. And so it's crazy. And the behind the scenes stuff is really good to watch as they go through all these aspects. And it's really fascinating to see just the level of attention they put into all of this. And like you were talking about the bald caps, there's a significant part of that where they talk about how to create those and how to make those look good. And they brought people over from Japan that specialized in making those types of wigs and how to make up to make it look natural on someone's head. And it's just, I don't know, it's really cool. It was a labor of love by thousands of people to make this series happen.
Why would they still use bald caps? Why wouldn't people just do the samurai haircut, shave the top of their head, and do?
You also have to grow the hair out that long, and that takes a long time. I mean, if you look at most of them, even Toranaga with his ponytail up, his hair is essentially down to his shoulders. And Yabu's is even longer than that. Yeah. So is his son. So I think that
nephew.
No, Toranaga's son.
Oh, I thought you meant Yabu's son.
No, Toranaga's son. Because is there now? Joe, do you know this one? Why is some of the heads shaved and why is some of it not?
I don't know what that is.
I didn't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is. If that's because most samurai, I believe, do the shaved pate, with the top knot. I don't know if that was a Minowara tradition as to why Toranaga and Nagakado did not. That could be the case. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, but I think some of that would just be timelines with that.
Yeah, the production values are incredible. The cinematography was phenomenal, and this show was a joy to just look at. Everything looked top-notch and great. So they got what they paid for. Good job. We're going to take a quick break for a note from our sponsor, Premier Health.
Yeah, I have a friend, or acquaintance, I guess. I'm not sure I'm really friends with him. We'll just call him JB for this. He just got done with a work trip from basically. He rode a lot of horse. was at sea for a long period of time.
Did he get locked in a cellar and get fish dumped?
Got locked in a cellar, and and just beaten and abused in many different ways, and his body is just aching from head to toe from having to deal with all this. And I don't know, is there anybody that you think can help him rejuvenate and get back to his normal self?
Braga, you have any thoughts on this one?
No.
Well, Bernsey Kuhn, your friend, JB, should check out Premier Health. They have solutions for back pain, neck pain, car accident injuries, samurai-related horse riding things, and more. We suggest seeing Dr. Brian Camille in Golden Valley, Minnesota, or Dr. Kelsey Camille in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. Learn more at premierhealthmn.com. That's premierhealthmn as in Minnesota.com.
The start of that, I thought he was talking about himself. I'm like, Joe Burns. I'm like, you went through something. Is this like a work trip? Like, what happened? What did they do to you? God.
No, thankfully I work from home, so I don't have to worry about that.
Get Casey over here quick. We're going to take a quick break from our Shogun discussion to talk about other samurai medium. Earlier in the show, we mentioned our individual appetites for samurai media, and I have not been exposed to this time frame or this culture very much. I've played Ghost of Tsushima for our Game Club segment. I watched Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress a couple of weeks ago. I've played the original Shogun Total War, and I've watched most of Samurai Champloo. If I were to continue down the noble path of the samurai, where should I go next? And we're going to phrase this as a game. You each have 3 recommendations. You're going to pit one against another. And then I'm going to choose as the regal lord of Outside is Overrated as your daimyo. Daimyo?
There you go. You said
yes.
it right.
I'm going to determine which one of these media is the proper path of the samurai.
Tamanagua over here.
Love it. So, which one of you brave warriors is going to put forth your selection first?
Well, so are you going to set what makes sense to match up? Because we don't know what each other are saying.
Yeah, you gave us very little clarity on this. Joe and I had some trepidation about it. We're like, wait, is it what?
There's no overlap between your lists, so
got it.
I would roughly rank them. What you are least confident in to your most confident. So save your best
for last.
Yes.
Okay.
Save your sharpest katana for last. Sneak into this camp with your tanto.
All right.
My first one's like a butter knife, so I'm really sorry how this is about to go then.
Well, so since this is a game, do we need to randomize? There's a die right in front of you. Do we need to roll to see who goes first?
We're going to go with beauty first. That's you.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about that, but I guess I'll take it.
He's blushing.
Bernsey Cool.
So I will start with, you said start with the weakest, but I'm going to start with the thing that's not the strongest in my mind, because it's been 20-ish years since I've seen it. But it is the movie Ran by Akira Kurosawa. Came out in the mid-1980s. And it is one of my favorite Kurosawa films for a couple of reasons. One, it's one of his more modern ones, so it is in color.
A lot of his films came out in like the 50s and 60s, right?
Yes.
Because like Hidden Fortress, which I watched, was I think 56.
Yes, yep. And Seven Samurai, I think, was right around that same time. So a lot of his big hits kind of came out in that time frame. He kept making lots of different movies. He made a lot of non-samurai movies too. So Ran was one of his later, if not one of his last samurai movies. And yeah, so one of the reasons I like it is because it's in color and you get to see a lot of like the vibrant like costumes and everything, and there's some really interesting stuff that he does with like lighting and shading on characters to make them look a little more like, just to sort of accentuate what's their mind state at the time. But the setup for the story is, have you ever read or seen Shakespeare's King Lear?
No.
So it is basically a samurai version of the tragedy King Lear. So you have this well-respected warlord who is up in his age, and he has 3 sons. And his plan then is to separate his kingdom, his lands, between the 3 equally when he is going to retire. Because he feels like that's going to be the best way for them to all work together. And two of the sons basically say, yes, we can easily work together. This is going to be a great plan for us to do this. And I believe it's the youngest son says, there's no way this is going to work. It's only going to end in us killing each other. I want nothing to do with it.
And that, as the youngest of, like, three brothers, I get that. My brothers are idiots. Like, they couldn't run, like, 2/3 of a country. Like, no way. No. Gotta kill my brothers.
Yep. And so then it's all about that son walking away from it, and then the other two starting to take over power, and then where that obviously starts to lead. And then the father seeing this tear apart his two sons, and what he tries to do to stop it, even though he can't really control much anymore. So it's a really interesting story. It has some pretty good, like, battle scenes, sort of baked into it. But a lot of it is just like that inner turmoil and tragedy amongst, like, this family that's tearing itself apart. So that's why it's one of my favorite Kurosawa movies, even though I haven't seen it in a long time. So that's why I would put Ran up there as one of my options.
Ran, Samurai King Lear versus...
Okay, so for this one, Joe went down the path of tearing families apart. I'm going to go through the path of putting families together. So this is something for you and your daughters to watch together. So in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a fantastic show, and the name is escaping me right now by its Japanese name, but when it was bought and purchased and came to the United States, it's 52 episodes, Samurai Pizza Cats. And now the Samurai Pizza Cats.
Samurai Pizza Cats.
Legit show. I thought it was like a fevered dream until as I was doing my research, I'm like, because like Samurai, it's easy to do ninja, right? Because ninja's everywhere. Samurai's a little bit more specific. And I came across it, and I'm like, there was like a chunk of my brain that had been locked off for years. There was nothing useful in there. But Samurai Pizza Cats was in the back behind like early photos of Pamela Anderson. So I moved Pam.
Two very different things.
Yeah.
Kitties and titties.
Both very formative of my youth in different ways. So anyways, it's about these 4 or 5 cats that exist in Tokyo that run a pizza shop, but they also at night run around in samurai gear and deal with the crime of the city. So it's they have this crazy balance between running a functional business, which they focus more on maybe than they should, like overhead and where they're getting ingredients, to then trying to defeat crime lords at night. So it's funny just how much focus they put on the economics of the business, but it's worth watching. So I highly recommend.
I want to interject. So Samurai Pizza Cats, it's these sort of samurais at night. Is this just a Japanese rebrand of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
It kind of feels like that for sure, because it came out after Turtles for sure.
Okay.
But now when you watch the show, the fact that they run like a pizza shop, right, is maybe part of the relationship to it.
How many cats are there?
4 or 5.
Okay.
But they all, it almost looks like, do you guys remember Ronin Warriors way back in the day?
I do not.
So they all wear like different sets of armor. I don't think they combine to do anything. But
one
like,
blue, one red, one purple, one
white.
orange.
The leader's white.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So it's a lot of.
Is a rat leading them?
No.
Okay.
Definitely like Japanese like tropes from the 80s for sure, left and right. But the name, when they changed the name, I think the name was, particularly when they brought it to the American market, was clearly they were going for a specific market. So something to watch with your daughters if you're interested.
Okay, so here is... Wow, I didn't anticipate this being such a difficult decision for me. So here is the problem. Burns, you had a very thoughtful answer, and that appeals to my logic brain. Like, the sensible answer is definitely Ran. But my Tom brain is just screaming for Samurai Pizza Cat. And, like, you brought up Pamela Anderson, and, like, that's... You know, that is maybe my first celebrity crush.
Oh, wow.
And, like... It's certainly the first one I can recall, so it's like, oh man, that is a strong pull. I am going to side with the logic brain on this one, because Samurai Pizza Cats is a derivative of my beloved TMNT. It was right on the edge of the katana, but I'm going to go with Ran for round 1 of this game.
I thought I was going to get obliterated on that one, so I will take that as a victory.
No, it was neck and neck. If it hadn't been quite as derivative of TMNT, Samurai Pizza Cats might have stolen the serious answer.
For people's reference, Samurai Pizza Cats is apparently available on Prime Video and Peacock and Freevee.
Does it have the Japanese name for what it was called? Because I didn't look that up, but I wonder what the name translated had to be wildly different. I would assume.
And I am going to watch that with my kids.
Okay,
so
good.
Thank you for the
recommendation. You're welcome.
I'll
it's
probably
like
watch
52 episodes. I'm like, who's going to watch 52 episodes?
I do not see that in there.
Okay.
All right. So Burns Kuhn is up 1-0.
Okay.
He led off that one. So Brian, why don't you lead off round 2?
Round 2, we're going to go into the fighting game genre. We're going to go with Samurai Showdown.
Okay.
So for all of us that grew up in the 90s, you'd be hard pressed to find a pizzeria in your hometown that did not have a Neo Geo system, which had the multiple carts in it with at least Samurai Showdown. Samurai Showdown, early on playing it was different enough from Street Fighter that it kind of created its own flair, and it was part of the reason that Neo Geo did get somewhat of a foothold in the country, although the systems obviously were wildly expensive and almost impossible to buy for any normal human. But you can do everything from Haomaru, who is the wandering samurai who's the main character, to Hanzo, who showed up in a bunch of different Neo Geo games. Hanzo is a famous ninja character from both Ninja? No, that's Ryu. Sorry, Hanzo is from World Warriors. He's also from Samurai Showdown. He shows up in a bunch of different things. You can have their derivative American, which is named Earthquake, which is an 8'9" fat dude with tattoos, with a hideous gut that hangs out. But it was different than Street Fighter because it was kind of based on if you get a hit. It only took a couple of hits to kill your opponent outright. It did not take much. It was a different kind of intensity, knowing, hey, yeah, I'm up on the life gauge, but if I get hit once or twice, this match is over. Also, I got interested in because Jubei Yagyu is in it. Jubei is the main character from manga's Ninja Scroll. He's a Ronin, technically, not a ninja. But Jubei is one of my favorite actual historical characters out of Japan as well. A famous duelist for using two-handed katanas. Dual-wielding katanas, should I say. I would, if you have not got a chance to kind of see how the art style of that game works, the beauty of the Neo Geo hardware pumping out at about around 32 bits, it's absolutely worth going back to. And I know you think old games suck, but this one you might actually dig.
Well, what about, didn't they just release a year ago a 3D Samurai Showdown
2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
And they leaned harder into each singular hit being so much more damage. You can end opponents in that game in 3 or 4 hits if you can hit just right.
Okay.
But it's kind of like they got warriors from all over the world. And the fun of that game is that it feels different than a Street Fighter game. And some of those Neo Geo games just felt like Art of Fighting, that kind of stuff. They were copying something. Samurai Showdown felt like it was actually doing something that was inherently unique to itself.
And so you're going with the original, or one of the original
We'll go
ones
with the
that was on
original Neo Geo release,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, since you're doing a fighting game, I will counter with a fighting game as well. But it's not a video game.
Good. I hate fighting games, so this is going to be great.
It's not a video game. It is a board game. You love board games, Tom.
I do love board games.
Yeah. So
way to butter me up.
Yeah.
Good open.
The board game is called Senjutsu. And Senjutsu is a 1 to 4 player, basically arena battling game. So you'll be playing one of a few characters. There's 4 that come with the base game. One is just a master samurai, another is a student. There's a Ronin, I believe, is one of the other main characters, or characters from the base game. But then there's also expansions. One of the expansions is
The Portuguese with guns?
No, it's an Englishman that is based pretty much off of William Adams or Anjin-san, and basically has a lot of different moves, and he has his pistols that he shoots as well. There's also a Onobugeisha, which is a woman with a baby carriage, and so she's fighting and she has a baby carriage that is with her. I still haven't found...
Get a babysitter.
I still haven't found, from looking through any of the rules, if there's anything that the carriage actually does other than just like always travels along with you. Didn't seem like there's any game mechanics around that. But yeah, so that's like the characters that you play.
So remember when we were doing our video game movie show and there was, what was the Frank West movie? You put it up, Dead Rising?
Dead Rising, yep.
Dead Rising. And like there was a zombie with a baby carrier and didn't like the zombie take a bite out of the baby?
I think so.
Yeah. That really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was messed up.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were we talking about?
So yeah, so that you can play a parent trying to protect their baby in this game. So the way that it works is it's a very small map, so it's like a hexagonal based map, and it's a really confined area. So it's not about like moving over long distances. You're really just maneuvering around each other, and you'll have a deck of cards. They have like base sets that you can start with, and then you can like customize them based upon whatever weapon you want to use. And each character has a certain set of weapons that they can use. And then you have other like standard types of cards that you can build into that. And then the way that the game plays out is you'll have your hand of cards and you will use those. And from top to bottom, those are going to give you actions that you can do. And so it'll like allow you to move, and then you can move kind of in whichever directions that you want to do. But then your attacks are going to be very directional. And so certain attacks are going to go out like in a cone in front of you. Some might be behind you. And then there's also specific spots that if you get your opponent in those spots, it can cause like a critical hit as well.
In my head, I'm picturing like the Devil May Cry board game, only where you're fighting each other and not like the mobs on the board.
Yes. It's similar to that. It's a lot quicker than that, though. It's the type of game that you can just really just sort of get through fairly fast. Once like you get everybody together, and then you have different pieces of the environment that you can put down as tiles sort of in the game area, and some of them are going to have added effects. So if you push somebody into a burning wagon, then they're going to take damage. And then there's like a shrine that allows you to do a reroll if you're adjacent to it or started adjacent to it on that turn.
How many players?
It can go up to 4.
So you could have essentially 3 just kill someone outright.
Yes. So you could team up with people.
Oh, Tom, I think I'm going to lose. This sounds like your kind of game.
Well, Ryan, in your honorable heart of hearts, which one of these would you choose?
If for the new experience, I would definitely. The board game actually sounds interesting enough. I would play that to kind of learn it. I have been playing versions of Samurai Showdown since I was 12. I would still probably stick with Samurai Showdown because it just happens to be the medium of fighting games that I love so much. But to know that there is something where 4 of us could go against each other and then table talk can ruin it for somebody, I think that could be a good time.
Yeah, and as the person who is always locked in the brig as a Cylon, that doesn't sound particularly appealing to me. I'm going with Samurai Showdown on this one. Senjutsu does sound super interesting, but there's a couple of things that just drag it down for me. First off, I have a hard time picturing 3 other people that I'd play it with, because like Phoenix would have no interest in dueling me and the other player. So my favorite board game companion is out. Yeah. So that's a bummer. And like I could play it with you, but then like trying to picture 2 other people, it's like, man, if we just have 4, I'd rather play Terraforming Mars. So like it sounds super interesting, but I just not being able to play with Phoenix and the potential for all 3 people to gang up on me just because I'm Tom, like...
you could set it up to be 2v2, so it's like you and Phoenix versus 2 other people also, but I will honor your choice.
Yeah, and Samurai Showdown, like, I'm not a big fighting game fan because I suck at them, and I get really frustrated when I'm bad at things. But I like the mechanic where it can be a couple of hits to victory as opposed to, like, getting just bum-rushed in Street Fighter. I played Street Fighter 2 online once. Perfect game against me. I'm like, I'm just not going to do this again. Yeah. And I haven't touched Street Fighter since then. And it's sad because that is a beloved IP from my childhood. Like Street Fighter at the arcades, at the Canaba County Fair. It's like, man, that was one of my gateways to video games. And that door is just closed now. So we're tied at 1-1. Burns won with Ran versus Samurai Pizza Cat.
Cats, it's plural.
Oh, I'll write that down.
Please
Samurai
honor
Pizza
them correctly.
That's like 2 mispronunciations through there, so take some drinks, guys.
Yeah, 2 drinks. There's a fair amount of ladies that listen to Outside is Overrated.
Folks.
Yeah.
I'm using the Midwestern guys, which is gender neutral.
Everybody. Yeah. I call everyone at work guys, too. Okay. So that was round 2. Senjutsu.
At the YWCA.
Yeah.
Good plan.
So Senjutsu versus Samurai Showdown. Brian takes that round, so we are tied at 1-1 going into the final round. Burns, we're going to go back to you to lead off the final round.
All right, so my final selection.
And so far, the first move has won both rounds.
Apparently. Though, no, I'm not going to say that. I'll save that till later. So my choice for this final bout is the Samurai Warriors franchise. I've played 4 and a little bit of 5. But you could probably play either of them if you want.
What are they at this point now? Is it 5?
It is at 5 for that.
Okay,
so
yeah.
Samurai Warriors is made by Omega Force, Koei Tecmo, and it is, if you're familiar with Dragon Warriors at all?
Yep.
The Musou games?
Yes.
Yes. So it is one of those, but in Japan. So it's samurai. And all the characters are based off of historical characters, but they're highly stylized, cartoonized. Well, not cartoonized, because that makes it seem like it's like, like Dilbert or something.
They're exaggerated.
Yeah. They're exaggerated versions of these historical characters.
The Dilbert Musou game would just print its own money.
And so it's a Musou game. So you're fighting as this super powered character, and you're just plowing through like swaths of enemies. They're flying all over the place. You have over the top abilities, and you're going through maps to try to take down generals from the other side in order to be able to win. And then basically the way that they have it set up is that they have various different. So it's like you almost play through the storyline of kind of each of the main characters, and you can see that through to its conclusion, and they'll kind of jump around in the time frame throughout the Warring States time. And so I played Samurai Warriors 5 for the first time last night because I was able to play it for free on PlayStation Extra, and basically you start off playing as Nobunaga Oda. And your first mission is you are trying to basically take hostage Ieyasu Tokugawa, who is the character that Toranaga is based off of, but it's the teenage version of him. So he's like the 12-year-old general. He's been taken hostage by one of the other clans, and you're going in to attack him to take him hostage. And so it's
like passing Tyrion around in Game of Dragons, right? What was the 5th book?
Dance with Dragons.
Dance with Dragons. Yeah, that's close.
Yeah, it's similar to that. Similar to that. So, but yeah, and so yeah, and it's one of those games. If you've played any of those games before, it is a lot like that. You get different equipment, you level it up, and gain more abilities. You have your over the top Musou attacks. I think they're called Musou attacks. That just are like just these outlandish things. And so it's just a huge button mashing good time.
Is there any character that's like the Lubu of that game? Like, I would be interested to know who like they put on that tier. Because Lubu in Dynasty Warriors, for example, was absolutely broken. Like, obviously the most powerful. I'm kind of wondering who they would choose from Japanese lore to kind of give that crown to.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure. Each of the games, although the 2 that I've played seem to have focused on different leaders as like the main ones. Samurai Warriors 5 is definitely Oda, Nobunaga Oda. And then I believe 4 it was like the Sonata clan, and I can't remember the name of them, that were like the focus. I don't know if they were like the most broken characters to play as in those, but yeah, so that's my choice, Samurai Warriors, either 4 or 5.
Yeah, something that you just played for the first time last night.
Well, no, I played like 100 hours of Samurai Warriors 4. I just played 5 for the first time because it was the more recent one, and I had the ability to download it for free. So.
Sure.
Before I jump into mine, is that something you think you might play some more of, just from your experience last night?
Oh, yeah.
You liked it?
Yeah. No, it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's mindless. Like, it and especially the early stuff is super easy to get through because...
Yeah. And there's a place for that sometimes.
Yeah.
There's a place for games like that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it gets harder as you get to some of the different scenarios as you get deeper into the game usually. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to playing it and trying to, like, level up and just have fun beating the crap out of everything.
I'm going to go with Bushido Blade.
Okay.
For those of you that have not played Bushido Blade, for those of maybe think about it this way, if you have played,
it's a PlayStation 1
it is that I know, and that's already a strike one against me because like Tom's like it wasn't made in the last 20 years. It was so wildly ahead of its time. To be honest, what it reminds me most now in modern gaming, it reminds me of when you're doing invasions in Elden Ring.
Okay.
You are put into situations. Essentially it's a fighting game, but it is a 3D environment. It can be anything from a forest to a temple to different areas. And it's you versus one opponent, and you're just in this gigantic kind of arena together. Not gigantic, but enough to give you a lot of room to move around. There's variability with weapons heavily, from sledgehammers to nodachi to katanas, everything in between. Each of these have different speeds, different attack attributes, different move sets. But the part that made the game so neat was the fact that when you play this game, it is a game where you can absolutely one-hit kill. If you're able to... I remember playing the end boss, and I didn't get a good ending for this. The end boss bowed before our fight, and I hit him in the head with a sledgehammer, and it killed him. And it's like, you have won with no honor. So you get different endings based on if you're working through the samurai code. You cannot attack anybody in the back. You cannot attack anybody when they're bowing, which... The first couple times I played through that game, I'm pretty sure that I just killed everybody in the most dishonorable way possible. I'm like, I'm good! But the fun part is that, so either you can kill somebody outright by hitting a very critical spot, neck, head, or you can absolutely work on trolling people, or not trolling them, but you can disable them. If you hit an arm enough times, they can't use it. So now if they're dual wielding, they got one arm. Or if they're using something like a sledgehammer, they swing much slower because they can only use one hand to do it. The worst you could do to people is you critical their legs, so at one point they're down on their knees, or one leg doesn't work, and they're crawling across the ground to you, but your legs are healthy, so you're just backing up laughing and talking noise to them as they attempt to close the 5 feet, which they can't. So there was a little bit of maybe poor sportsmanship if you really feel like it. But the fact that the game...
Which the samurai are known for.
Yes.
Which it was, it's part of their key history, I guess. But the part that I appreciate about the game so much is it was so far ahead of its time. Every hit mattered so much. It was so much deeper. And the fact that there was so much more, there wasn't really a lot of like 3D fighters like that at that time. There wasn't. Everything was 2D. Everyone was trying to copy what Capcom was doing, and it went in a different direction, and it pushed things in a way where even when they talked about some of the PvP, I forgot who it was, but one of the game designers with Elden Ring, they talked about how their PvP and some of their inspiration was Bushido Blade. It's just like, hey, we want it to be this thing where it can be almost a dance going back and forward, but we want to create enough room and environment to let you guys choose how you engage. Because how your weapon works dictates a lot of how you're going to approach. Can I keep my opponent in the distance that they're not effective, but I am? What happens when they get into the area they're effective, but I'm not? How do I pull myself from that? And that push and pull, I think, was a really neat thing, so wildly ahead of where it should have been.
Well, it's interesting how this vacillates between very thoughtful combat for you and completely trolly interactions with NPC characters.
Yeah, that's my personality.
Yeah, one extreme or the other. So my experience with Bushido Blade, which I played on PlayStation 1.
You did play this?
Yeah, the first
Wow.
couple of boards, you cannot fight your opponents, and the game does not really explain that. So, like, you go head-to-head, you kill your opponent, game over. What the hell is this thing?
This is broken!
Yeah, sweet fighting game. Let me run back and jump in this well. Great. So, Samurai Warriors versus Bushido Blade. Brian, you kind of walked into an ambush. The first two boards.
Oh no! I chose something poorly.
Yeah, I hate that game with a burning fiery passion, with like all of my Tom being. So, Samurai Warriors ends up taking the third round. I have an affinity for Dynasty Warriors, but I haven't played it since Dynasty Warriors 2, which was a launch title on the PlayStation 2.
Okay.
And was the first game I bought on PlayStation 2, and like, I remember gleefully getting on a horse and mowing through hordes, and just the experience of how many enemies you could have on the screen at one time, and just what a happy thing that was for me in my PlayStation 2. So
there was, and to be short on adding on that, there was such a big jump in technology at that time. We don't really have jumps like that anymore. Mm-hmm. We have, ray tracing, and we have frame rates, and we have all these more nuanced things. But I remember playing Dynasty Warriors was one of the 2 or 3 games I bought right away. Tekken 2 was one of them. Madden 2001 was one of them as well.
Yeah, Smuggler's Run pretty early too.
Oh, and Smuggler's Run, I had that too. That was great. But I remember just being blown away by the amount of people on that screen at once and the detail of it. That was like, it was a staggering kind of thing at the time.
Yeah, it was groundbreaking, right? Like, that was a foundational moment in gaming for me, was Dynasty Warriors 2, which sounds kind of silly to say out loud.
But they're on Dynasty Warrior what now? It's still...
Actually, Origins. They rebooted it, basically.
Still loved.
And it just came out a couple months ago, I believe, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and like other popular IP are taking the Musu formula. There's the Breath of the Wild based one, right?
Yeah.
Heroes. Yep.
Yeah. Which is, they're all made by basically the same studio. They're just like paying, they're being like licensed out to do those games. They did one for Persona. And there's a few other ones too. I can't think of them off the top of my head. So yeah, it's, they're good at making that type of game. It's just whether you're in the mood for that type of game or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Burns wins the competition 2-1. None of you said Shogun the novel, which I hinted at like 3 times in our text chain. I'm like, Shogun the novel, totally a valid choice. That's the next samurai I think I'm going to consume.
I was going to say, and I'm going to say, that's because you've already started it, and you're not a quitter, Tom, so you're going to finish it.
I'll finish it someday. I'm very much a quitter. Well, I'm not a quitter with books, but like, as we'll talk about on Unfiltered this month, I'm in the middle of a Star Wars series. I'm in the middle of a fantasy smut series. I'm in the middle of a book about food. Now I'm in the beginning of Shogun, and I think there's one other book that I'm actively reading.
GTA book, right?
Jack, the Outlaw Story of Grand Theft Auto by David Kushner. Is that the right name?
You and Kelsey have the running joke that I married Tom, which is a horrible joke.
No, King Tom is the best. Because
they are very similar with how they are particular in certain areas. But one thing that she would be appalled by is you doing multiple books at a time. Because with Kelsey, it was really hard because we were watching Ted Lasso. We got to, I think, the last 5 episodes of season 3. And then I had to get ready this week. And so we went through all of Shogun. I could see that it physically grated on her soul not to complete it. Like she does not shift gears until the task is done. And she was mildly irritable for a good chunk of the week. You can tell by it. So you guys do have one big difference at least there. Yeah. And her facial hair is a little bit thinner than yours.
A little bit. Yeah. But I mean, they both play well. So we're talking about Shogun. If you're interested in our other samurai media, the things that we talked about in this segment was the Kurosawa film Ran, the TV show Samurai Pizza Cats, the board game Senjutsu.
People are getting drunk now.
Drink twice. The video game Samurai Showdown from the Neo Geo era. The more recent video game Samurai Warriors, and another old game in Bushido Blade. Now we're going to move our discussion back to Shogun. We're going to discuss our impressions of the main story. So this is going to be largely spoiler-free. I think within Shogun, only the thing that happens at the very end is spoilery, right?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, there might... I guess it really depends on people's appetites for what a spoiler is or not, right? If you're talking about just general, like, this is what the story's about, I don't think that's a spoiler. If we're giving like specific like ends of episodes, what happens, or this character dies, or this character dies, or this character does this, that maybe is a little bit more spoilery.
And lots of characters die in the show, so we're not going to spoil any of those specifically, but there are a few main themes through the story, and we're going to break down each one of those in some level of detail. Mm-hmm. And then the very last thing we discuss, if you really want to avoid spoilers, probably jump off for that. So the main story threads includes the Council versus Toranaga. This is the political heart of the story, revolving around the power struggle between the Council of 5 regions tasked with ruling Japan and Toranaga, who seeks to consolidate power. Toranaga's role as a cunning and strategic leader is central as he navigates betrayals, reluctant allies like less than fully committed daimyo, and the overwhelming odds stacked against him. His flight from Osaka and preparation for war reflect the larger backdrop of civil unrest and looming conflict. So this is essentially Game of Japan's, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Were you guys invested in the political intrigue element of Shogun?
I thought it was interesting because the show makes it hyper clear about how the day-to-day rituals and how the formality, I guess we'll keep using that word, of Japan is very, very specific and rigid. And I love how at one point this council is trying to essentially vote out Toranaga and then basically vote to have him kill himself. Like they have the power to go, hey, we want you just to die. But how they can get so caught up in their own bureaucracy. Like he leaves the council And because they don't have enough people to make a vote, they can do nothing. They're impotent until they get another person.
All thanks to Robert San's rules of order, I think, is they didn't have the spot to fill in the council, so they couldn't do anything.
And he just knows, he's like, yeah, if they can't vote this way. And then they're like, crap, well, all right, look at the bylaws. And then they're trying to figure this thing out. And it's just like, oh no.
Well, I think the juxtaposition is interesting because there's that rigid formality which hamstrings the council, but then there's also foreign influence at play because 2 of the 5 regions are Christians.
Yeah.
And Christianity is being introduced into Japan by the Portuguese, who are seeking to expand their hold on the New World and exploit the riches of Japan through trade with China. And it's like there's that foreign influence coming in that's also a part of this 5-person council.
Yeah, and you get a pretty clear idea that maybe the only person, and maybe we'll debate this at the end for like still, everyone's intentions, Tornaga's intentions, maybe as we kind of wrap this up in the episode. But it is brutally clear early on that every single person is heavily influenced by either corruption, greed, or power. Outside of maybe Toranaga. Toranaga is the only one that maybe keeps it so veiled as to what his intentions are.
Kind and benevolent Toranaga.
Yeah, everybody else is...
His secret heart is full of like puppies and rainbows, dude.
Blatantly
Samurai
corrupt.
pizza cats.
They just exist in their Guido.
Pamela Anderson.
But it's everybody else is brutally corrupt, and Toranaga is the one that just... I love how they're insulting him to his face. And you're misinterpreting what they're saying. They're not insulting me. Thank you for caring so much about the realm. He's just so perfectly political with how he handles it.
Well, and it's funny because he handles it that way, but they all know who he is, and that's why they're treating him and
they're scared of him
because he's the strongest of them all, right? And he has the lineage to back him up as well, and so that's why he's the biggest threat. And I don't know. It's really cool how sure, Toranaga's pulling some of those strings to cause some of that to happen, but then some of it's just like, oh yeah, well, these guys are going to tear each other apart to some extent because they're not going to agree with each other when push comes to shove, and even if it's in their best interest to try to stop Toranaga, like, they're still going to, like, have scuffles about all sorts of other things, and it's really interesting to see how, difficult that is for Ishido to try to like control it all and try to stop what he sees as being a danger to the status quo from happening. It's just he's not powerful enough to be able to do that. And part of it, which they don't really go into in the series, but is a big part of the books, is because of his lineage. He was a peasant. He became a samurai basically through fighting and working his way up through like the military ranks in Korea, and that's how he got to know the taiko and how he ended up becoming, getting his fief and becoming a samurai and then becoming a ruler of samurai. So
and that history of him makes him really susceptible to being weak. He was referred at one point as a bureaucrat.
Yep.
And you can see that's like the worst thing you could call him.
Quick anecdote from the book. Like, the book does such a phenomenal job of setting those things up. Like, it talks about the taiko's history and Ishido drink, and how they rose up from peasants to be these high ruling lords of Japan, and then they implemented a rough caste system, drink again, so that nobody could replicate what they did. I thought that was really interesting, and it was just like a half a page aside in the book giving you that valuable context. And like, I know you can't take everything from the book and project it into a show, and especially like background information like that, but like, if you're at all interested in Shogun the show, I highly encourage the book, because it's just, I'm 3 chapters in, I'm like, oh, every page I'm like, oh, check this thing out that they didn't have a chance to get to in the show.
And it's a book that does grab you early, because there are some books that kind of have a wind up, right? It takes like a little bit of time to get to the point where you're like, okay, now the book's got me. I remember Shogun, the first time that I read it, it had me really quick, just because of the way that he describes the history. And most of this history is actually based off what happened. He was largely pretty faithful to the actual events that led to kind of the setting that he described.
Yeah, the broad strokes, yes.
Next up, we have Blackthorn's crusade and assimilation. Blackthorn, an English pilot, begins as an outsider with a mission to undermine Portuguese influence and establish trade relations with Japan. His capture and imprisonment in Osaka, followed by his relocation to a fishing village, set the stage for his transformation. Tasked with training a Japanese regiment in European warfare, Blackthorn becomes a bridge between cultures, gaining insight into samurai values and Japanese culture. Customs. So Blackthorn is a complete fish out of water. Mm-hmm. How compelling did you find this storyline against the other things that were going on in Shogun?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier. I think starting with his perspective, similar to what the book does, is so helpful because you are this outsider in this world as well. And so being able to be along with him and being like, what in the heck is going on? Why is this guy doing this? Why'd that guy just get his head chopped off? Like, you know, you're experiencing kind of the shock of this culture along with him. And that's a powerful thing to be able to do in like a movie or a TV series, because you have this level of camaraderie and it helps you grow a little bit closer to that character. And then you learn a lot about that character without needing to know an extensive backstory about them by then seeing how they address those situations. Because, I mean, if you're actively watching a piece of media, you're probably thinking about, well, what would I do in this situation? And I don't know if I'd say that. I'd maybe approach it this way or blah, 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 blah. And so it's a way to sort of create Blackthorn in your head, and see like what he is as a concept based upon what he's doing and what you think you would do in those situations, which I don't know. I just think it's really interesting and neat. And yeah, it becomes very clear how much he hates Catholics, very early on. And
the Portuguese. I love how he just loses his mind talking about them every single time.
Well, imagine if like you're in a completely foreign situation. You can't speak the language. You don't know anybody. And the person that is picked to speak for you is a mortal enemy, both religious, nationally. Yep. Like, it's a fascinating position that he's put in right from the beginning. And
it's interesting just because, like, when we talked kind of ad nauseum about the customs of Japan, the penalty for not understanding the customs of Japan is death. So he gets to a place where he does not understand how these customs work, and if you don't follow them, you die. Those are pretty high stakes for a guy that's coming into this thing.
Though, to be honest, they do seem to give him
more reprieve.
Definitely more leeway than they would give to a native Japanese person.
Yep.
For not following those customs or not understanding or maybe acting out of turn. I mean, even Toranaga, with some of the things that he continually does that Anjin-san does that frustrates him, he will still give him a little bit of that leeway to some extent. But I don't know. It's interesting. And then also like what you were talking about with the father earlier on that's translating for him, and then you get another one later on, Suku-san.
Was that Mariko's homeboy pastor?
Yes. So that's the priest that's in Osaka that does a lot of the translating for like the Council of Regents and a lot of the leaders, and for Toranaga. That you see that he's a little bit different than this other priest who is driven by this hatred of the Protestants and is sort of not being truthful in what he's saying. Whereas, Suku-san isn't doing that. And is still being like honorable and is giving Blackthorn a little bit of hints about what not to do. So it's just interesting to draw like that difference between those characters as well, and then how they interplay with John Blackthorn.
And Blackthorn becomes this massive threat upon arrival because he is the only one that has outside perspective of understanding what the Portuguese's true plan is in place from the Jesuits, essentially.
Yep.
Their idea is the Spanish Empire and the Portugal Empire separated the world and said, hey, you go discover whatever these lands here or here are yours, and Japan falls into the Portuguese. And Toranaga, as he's having these conversations with Blackthorn, finds out they are using Ronin, they are gun running, there's weapons being used against the Japanese government that is being supplied by the Portuguese. And at one point, the part I think that truly staggers Toranaga is when Blackthorn just straight up explains, he goes, look, the Portuguese believe that they own this. He's like, wait, is that the correct word? That the correct word? Japan belongs. Japan belongs to the Portuguese. He's like, yeah, that's how this works, and their goal is to replace you. Mm-hmm. And that immediately, and not only is Blackthorn a stranger in a foreign land, and he's trying to dodge his own death in other ways, but now the Portuguese want him dead as fast as they possibly can, because if that gets exposed, it completely screws up their foothold. And that the pressure there's immense. Because didn't they talk about like 1 million gold ducats? Or what are they called? Ducats?
Yeah.
Whatever
ducats? I don't know.
Ducats,
yeah.
whatever the is the bullion or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the amount of money the Portuguese were making was nuts.
Yep.
They were making huge money as the sole trade partner to Japan, which we know would lead to eventually isolationism, which winds up getting adopted later in time.
Yeah, Blackthorn is our gateway into this show. He plays a big role in many different aspects of the story. And what I think is so interesting about Blackthorn is he comes in as a stranger in the strange land. Then the show gets very heavy and oppressive as like all the political maneuvering happens and a bunch of bad stuff happens in the last couple of episodes. And it's Blackthorn's relationships with the other characters that kind of provide some levity for those other overbearing moments. So there's Blackthorn's relationship with Mariko-sama. Mariko, the translator and confidant, plays a key role in Blackthorn's assimilation into Japanese society. Their relationship evolves into a complex mix of cultural exchange, mutual respect, and romantic tension, highlighting the personal stakes amidst the larger political and military drama. Burns, you already mentioned earlier that the relationship between Blackthorn and Fujikun was one of the highlights of the show for you. Mm-hmm. How did the Blackthorn and Mariko-sama relationship how did that storyline grab you?
Yeah, so this was one of the bits of this series that I felt it seemed like it didn't end up having as much of a build-up as it needed to have.
Agreed.
It was missing maybe a couple more scenes where there was a little bit more of a connection between the two of them to make it have, I think, the weight that it actually should have.
I agree, and I'll also add it's kind of a roller coaster. Like it takes off like a rocket, and then there's an episode where it's like completely back down on Earth, and then like it ebbs and flows so much. It's almost dizzying the pace of this particular relationship.
Emotional whiplash between those two seems to be it.
And I think the stuff like where it drops precipitously, like makes sense in the plot. And that all is very similar to like how it all plays out within the book and everything. But I just feel like the relationship between them, there needed to be more scenes where they sort of broke down a little bit more or had a little bit more of that, I guess, less formal relationship.
Vulnerability.
To help, to help that, because they only really have the one scene that really kind of like showed their vulnerable sides to each other.
At the hot spring?
At the hot spring?
Yeah.
No, at the hot spring, which then leads to that down the line. And so I think that's...
Not down the line, it's like 30 seconds later.
Right. And so I feel like there needed to be a little bit more of a foundation of building that up, leading up to that point. I think that's one of the things that they kind of missed out on.
It's a pacing issue.
Yes. They needed to have more of those seeds planted for a couple episodes before that to help make that seem more real and more meaningful, because I think it just sort of hurts that special relationship that they have from being as meaningful later on, because it wasn't set up as strongly as it could have been. So that would be one of my critiques of the show.
I think it's interesting comparing it to like my Judeo-Christian values. I'm in love with Phoenix, so I married Phoenix. Mm-hmm. We made babies, and like that's kind of life now, and like that's great. Blackthorn has a wife in England.
Yeah.
Mariko-sama has a husband in Japan with her, at times in the house with them, and like there's this romantic tension between these two people that are already married, and I just...
Well, I mean, there is one significant thing, kind of spoilers, so tune out for maybe 20 seconds, but at that point, Mariko thinks Butaro is dead. Remember? Because he does the sacrifice in Osaka to lead everybody away from the pier. And so at that point, she thinks he's dead. So really, she's not tied down. You could argue, I mean, it's a different area code. So, Blackthorn's okay.
It's not cheating if it's your own dog.
But I mean, also, I guess, realistically looking at the fact that, it's going to take a lot for Blackthorn to get back to England.
Yeah, he's never going back.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, I guess it kind of makes sense that, given what's in front of you, maybe you would take action on that because you don't know if you're actually going to get back to your family or not.
And also we talked about it earlier, but like just how the marriage system works in Japan, they were pretty free-willed for how rigid they are in certain ways. They talk about pillowing at different times, which is basically just when they talk about sex or hey, your husband seems really stressed. Why don't you book him a courtesan?
Yeah.
Pick a really good one, send him over there, he'll be fine. And there's just all of that to it.
Yeah. One of my favorite scenes that I forgot about till I was researching for the show, because I didn't get a chance to reread the book, but I was just going through some different things, and one of the best scenes is when they first offer Blackthorn to be with a courtesan, and he's just like appalled, and so then they're like trying to figure out why he's so like mad about this, and they're like, well, maybe he prefers boys. And then they mention that and he's even more angry, and it's like, well, maybe a duck, I don't know. Like just get a duck and set it next to him and see what happens. Like,
because that really happened in the book.
Yes, it's like a scene where they're talking about why is it that he's not, because the whole cultural like difference in this is that like the pillowing aspect of it is just like it's a natural thing, and like if you don't do that, it's like you're not freeing up this aspect of yourself.
Yeah, the vitality builds up or something like that, like blocks up.
Exactly, and so like it's that Western sort of view of it. And needing to get those humors out to some extent, to use another like more English term. And so that's the thing. But then he's sort of rooted in those very Judeo-Christian values of, I don't know, we can't do that. And then just, I'm not going to be with a hooker or a whore, or all this stuff. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's one of those aspects that didn't really come up at all, that I thought would have been a pretty easy thing to throw into there, and would have been a little bit of a nice humorous reprieve at some point also.
He does have a great line berating Mariko-sama for the casual buggery reference.
That's true.
Yeah.
They also like talk about with the most of the Japanese characters that are non-Christian view it as like some sort of like stupid little thing that people do. Oh, don't bring your Christian nonsense here. Like they have very strong opinions about it. It's not to define them.
So beyond Blackthorn and Mariko's relationship, there is civil and political intrigue. Blackthorn is repeatedly drawn into civil situations and power struggles, often guided by Mariko-sama. The series delves deeply into alliances, betrayals, and the delicate balance of maintaining honor while navigating the dangerous waters of Japanese feudal politics. The interplay between Portuguese Jesuits, Dutch traders, and Japanese factions adds a layer of international intrigue. So did the overall like international intrigue, was that a major pull for you guys, or was that less intriguing aspect of the story?
I'd say that was a major pull, because the regents are focused on this what you can essentially say local grab for power, right? You've got 5 individuals that are essentially trying to almost like create another Taiko situation. And they've got an heir that's not of age, and they're all pushing and pulling to try to find their way to the top of that heap. But while they're doing this, there is a much larger threat at play with the Portuguese and what they're planning to do. And until John brings that up, everyone's pretty much oblivious to that. It's pretty clear, too, that even the regents that are Christian aren't fully aware of what the plans are of the Portuguese, or they're just being paid enough where they don't care.
Yeah.
But there's a much larger threat that people are not aware of.
So the Portuguese are a major threat. Do you think it would have been practical to deal with that threat by sending like a teenage assassin to just like stab their leader? Would that have just solved everything? It's a Game of Thrones reference. The Night King.
Oh god.
Winter King. Yeah.
Yeah, and that super short again. At least in this series, they treated the major threat with enough reverence and focus that it should have been. In that series, maybe not. We'll take the biggest bad, have someone run at them and shank them, and then we'll deal with the number 2 bad as the end guy. It's just like, what are we doing? I thought how the Jesuits work was very interesting, and I also thought the Mariko's teacher's name is what, one more time?
Tsuku-san?
Tsuku-san. he was the only one I felt like was at least somewhat genuine. He seemed like he cared about what they were doing for like the religion and the people. And then it's funny watching him interact with everybody else who's just talking about gold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought Tsuko-san was a really interesting character and really genuine. Like, he is the person that you would, like, invest in as, like, a messenger of God, right? Like,
Yes.
he seemed to have, like, the morals that matched the message.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, he still knows, like, all of the things that the church is doing, but since, that's coming from the Pope, it's holy. It's, they're doing it all for holy reasons, so it's fine, right? So I'm sure that's how they can get around that, that good old logical fallacy there or whatever,
Yeah, I love the international intrigue. I learned from this show that I really like political thrillers, and like some of my favorite elements were the posturing of the council and then the interactions with the Portuguese.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole reason why Blackthorn is there, and it's the whole reason probably why he's kept alive. Like, the main reason Toranaga takes an interest in him is that he is an enemy to these people that are influencing his country, and more and more every day, and trying to get a better understanding or an outsider's perspective of what they're trying to do, what the Portuguese role is, and what the general, like, grander world is important to know. And he's got, like, the foresight to know that that's going to be important if he's going to be a key leader in this country, or the leader of the country.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah.
Hey, where's Macau?
It's near Hong Kong and China.
Okay, so at one point that's where the gun running is coming out of, is that region, right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
So we have all of these big, impactful threads to the main story. We have all these rich and colorful characters.
Real quick, just in case, because we've not touched base on this, John's backstory is interesting as well, because John is running out of Holland. Mm-hmm. And he's essentially he's a privateer, isn't he? He's not quite a pirate, but they've been basically told that if you come across anything owned by the Portuguese, wipe it.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's a long history that they find out about John of just basically murdering and razing places to the ground. Yep. So he has a deep-seated already battle going on with these groups. But if it becomes revealed what he has been doing, he'll be put to death as essentially a pirate too. That is a big piece of this as well, and we just kind of missed that part.
Well, and not necessarily John per se, but like that was the goal of their mission.
What they were sent to do,
with all the ships that went out, it was the Dutch that sent it out, and it was to make war and to try to open trade where the Catholics had a monopoly. And
even within that framework, Blackthorn was still an outsider because he was an Englishman on this Dutch expedition. I think there were 3 Englishmen, all pilots, amongst the hundreds of people that set out on this voyage.
I believe so.
So we have all of these impactful threads, all of these rich characters. So all of that put together, Brian, what is it that stands out most about Shogun's story to you?
For me, it's watching. One of the biggest parts is watching how Toranaga kind of operates, because he is very much someone who does counter moves. He talks about early on where, I don't know if he was discussing it with his son, but he's talking with someone and he goes, look, we make our move when your enemy makes the mistake. That's when you move. You pick your timing. And the part that I find so fascinating about the story in regards to Toranaga is that there are lots of wildly small mistakes that the regents make, like really, really small things. And he capitalizes on all of it. Like, they do things that just seem so mundane, they don't seem like any kind of weakness. And then what he does is he takes that moment and he turns it against them. When he resigns from the regents and they're trying to figure out what to do, he realizes their bureaucracy is going to cause a problem, and he's safe for a period of time, and he'll use that time. Even when there's a death that's close to him, he uses that death to buy himself more time. These little tiny moments that he winds up using. And it's at one point the regents find a guy that is doing kabuki theater in an effort to deal with this. They hire some actor and they stick him on the regent. He doesn't know what he's even doing anymore.
But he's loyal to the right cause. So.
But he
can play that role.
Yes.
So.
And he starts to realize very quickly what John means before really anybody else does. And that alone causes conflict. And they won't vote anymore until John's dealt with, which buys him more time. So it's moves, it's counter moves, and how... how as time goes on, one of my favorite parts of the entire story is how John Blackthorne becomes one of the very few people that Toranaga actually trusts. Toranaga always talks about, hey, look, in this world, you have yourself. That is it. You get that, and you just have to deal with everybody else. But, like, I think just because everybody else is so veiled with intention, that John doesn't operate that way. He's bombastic. He has emotional explosions. And that ability to kind of see what his internal barometer is, Toranaga winds up trusting him deeply later on.
Yeah, it's a conversation he has with Nagakado at one point, his son, where he's like, why do you keep playing this game of friends and enemies? It's only you. All you have is you. And you have to be what you need to be in order to succeed, is kind of what it is. And it's like, don't get close to this person. Don't grandstand to this person. It's just about like you and being above it all, kind of. And I think it's an interesting way to look at it. And it is the type of way that if you are seeing yourself as what you want to, if you're trying to control an entire situation, you have to be above it all, right?
Yep.
And so I think that's that perspective that is what makes him, more powerful than the other regents, because he's not attached to any of these side causes that are distracting the other regents.
And you can't tell what motivates him. That's the tricky part too. It's just everybody else, it's clear, okay, power, money, power, money. And with him, it's just like, okay, so what is it you want? And he doesn't let people know that.
Yep. Because he's a master of, Mariko has the line where she's talking about the three hearts, and you have the heart that you show to everybody. You have the heart that you share with your loved ones. And then you have your secret heart that only you know. And Toranaga is a master of that sort of internalized secret heart, and there's very few people throughout the story that can dig into that or get a view of what that is.
Mm-hmm. And it's awesome too, because he is so tactful with so many. He never outright shows anger for the most part. He never attacks when insulted. He just deftly moves around and just keeps it very neutral at all times while he does his small decisions as it goes. So it's infuriating because it's like he's so fluid that they can't grip him. That's the thing.
He kind of epitomizes what everyone is striving for, right? Like, he is so able to contain himself and his emotions. Like, he's got the self-regulation that everyone strives for, and like only Toranaga has mastered, apparently.
Yep.
So Burns, thinking about like the entire Shogun package, what is it that stands out to you about the narrative?
Yeah, we talked about a little bit how, like, the, relationship between Blackthorne and Mariko maybe needed a little bit more time to develop, or at least a couple more scenes to help make that more meaningful. But I think these grander threads that we're talking about, I think they do a fantastic job of weaving all of that together. I do wonder if George R.R. Martin, to some extent, was influenced.
Write another book? No, he's not.
No, I wonder if he was influenced by Shogun to some extent with the creation of Westeros and everything that's happening in some of the political intrigue, because there's a lot of that's sort of matched in there as to how there's like all of these plots that all of these different people are trying to sort of see to a conclusion or see to a certain goal, but you have like these couple of people that are kind of above that trying to manipulate all of that. All of it is really well crafted to sort of weave into each other. You get the right information at the right time of someone's backstory to help you understand a little bit more about how they've been acting up until that point, but then to help really understand the actions that they're going to take moving forward in that episode and then the episodes following from that. There's a few different instances where they have just the right amount of background that they show, and then how that sort of gets recontextualized a little bit as that episode goes on. I think is really well done.
From just the novel standpoint, this is still probably a top 3 read of all time for me. James Clavell put together an incredible book, and it's sometimes hard where like there's so much good literature out there that things we can be bombastic sometimes with what we're saying. I mean, it is a masterpiece what he did. This is just an incredible piece of literature.
I think the pacing for the show is so phenomenal because early on there's a lot of posturing. The last third of the show is very bleak and oppressive, and you see a lot of the consequences for what was set up earlier in the show. And it's almost to the point where I'm like, I gotta get through the show, but I just need a break after an episode because it's all bad all the time, and it's like there wasn't a lot of levity to break the tension for me.
The final 3 episodes are heavy.
Yeah.
Because it's like the depression has set in. That's what it felt like for me, those final 3. Getting through them was hard.
Yeah, and it essentially sets the bar that life is crappy, everything sucks, and there's nothing you can do about it, right?
We're all Bintaro. That's just where we're at.
We're gonna next. There are a couple specific things that I want to talk about. So here we're gonna give the spoiler alert. Spoilers for Shogun. We're gonna discuss spoilers and our thoughts and concerns heading into season 2. So spoiler alert. If you don't want to know the big reveal at the end of season 1, this is a great time to check out. Thank you for listening to Outside is Overrated. We'll be back next month to talk about mechs. Support the show at patreon.com/OiO and visit premierhealthmn.com. That's premierhealthmn as in Minnesota.com. All right, so the big reveal at the end of season 1. Oh, Toranaga is Emperor Palpatine.
I don't know about that.
I think that's Palpatine had a much more egregious power grab. Now here's my question to you guys, okay? And this is, I think this is a healthy little bit of a debate here. So now how it ends is that they are able to create a situation where Toranaga is going to essentially ascend to Taiko Shogun, whatever you want to say. We don't know what the future for the Emperor lies because we're still waiting for him to become 16. What happens in that situation? Do you think that Toranaga wanted that position of power the entire time? Or do you think that he was willing to take the power for the good of everyone? Which is it to you?
You're cute, Brian. This was absolutely a premeditated thing from the very first moment. Joey, you mentioned George R. Martin, and yes, he was heavy influenced. George R. Martin's exact thought process was, what if I had Toranaga, but she's a teenage girl, and the first time you meet her, she's topless? Boom! Game of Thrones. Everything was premeditated, and here's what clued me off to that. Toranaga, he's very charismatic, and everything that he says, everything that he does leads you to believe that he's this benevolent soul always acting on behalf of the realm, right? But who does he employ to achieve those ends? The horribly unreliable Yabushige, who's playing both sides, and Toranaga knows that, and he puts him into the positions that he wants and needs to further his agenda. This kind, benevolent person is using every single character around him. Everyone has a purpose. He has no friends or allies. Everyone exists to be a tool for him to become the Shogun.
I will gently push back on that. There are multiple times, particularly when the Taiko is passing, and maybe this could have been strategic timing. He was offered the position to take it alone, and he goes, "Well, if you do that to me, these other people are going to attack me and kill me. That's what is going to happen." And
just a quick clarification: wasn't he going to be the ruler until the heir came of age? I thought that was still. So that's the problem.
Yeah,
there's a time frame on it. He doesn't want a time frame. He wants to be the Shogun forever.
So, but I don't always. There are so many times where he could take an explicit power grab and achieve that goal, and he doesn't. When I watch this series, I always view it very much as he talks about. Hey, he's like, no matter what happens. Our job here is to prevent massive bloodshed to take the realm. I do think that he could have Crimson Sky. He could have done it. He could have chosen to do that. He could have attacked Osaka. He could have ripped it apart. But as the series goes on, it becomes clear to him that was never really a true option. He doesn't choose to ever do that. He does it with far more subterfuge, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that if it was a blatant power grab that he wanted, I think that he could have done it in a far quicker way than the way that he did it, if that's what he wanted. I do think that he wants to safeguard the realm, but the question now is going to be going forward, and we'll talk about this future. What does he do with the heir?
Yeah, so I think the truth lies in between
it's on an extreme.
Two of you.
Nope, no chance.
So I feel like you're seeing Toranaga from a much more nefarious viewpoint, in that he, especially if you're referencing him as Palpatine, for crying out loud.
He is the big bad, and They did a masterful job of masking it until the last moment. It's what Martin tried to do with Danny Harris.
Palpatine committed genocide.
Yeah, well, Palpatine was just
genocide is a really strong word for what he did.
I think
Order 6, whatever it was, he killed everybody.
I really don't think what Toranaga is doing is for just his own, like, grandeur. He's not doing it just to be the guy. He's doing it because he believes his vision for Japan is the correct vision. And sure, it helps that it was his birthright to be the Shogun and eventually be that lone sole ruler and sort of that, I guess, carrying them forward into a new age. That's, I think, how he views it. And so it's a little bit less that he's Palpatine and a lot more that he's like the once and truthful king and is finally coming back to...
He's Aragon.
Something like that. I think it's more like that. I think it's a lot less nefarious. I'm curious as to, and I think part of it is that in the book you get a lot more of his internal thinking throughout than what they can reveal through the series, which I think makes it difficult. And sure, he's using all of these people, but I mean, the reason why there's the scenes where he's out with the Falcons and doing falconry, there's a lot of correlations in the book between sort of the Falcons and how you learn how to control them and get them to do what you want to do, and how that's the same thing as having vassals and getting them to accomplish what you need to accomplish.
Because he calls Yabu and he calls John Goshawks.
Yes, so they're both Goshawks, which are like the same, like very impulsive. You throw them at something to cause chaos and confusion. And then, Mariko is a peregrine. Mm-hmm. And she's something that you want, when you want something done with precision, you put her into that place. And how it was all about, I think Toranaga, rightfully so probably, believes that his vision for Japan is the right one. And it's a vision without the regents, without the bureaucracy, without all of this squabbling. And it has to have this one ruler over everything, so that then the rest of society can just develop and grow and prosper.
That's very elegantly said, and I see where I erred in the comparison to Palpatine, because Palpatine is just a bad guy who's out to murder everything and subjugate everything.
Yes.
So that was not an apt choice. I chose him because he's an instantly recognizable big bad who started as one thing and was working behind the scenes to become another thing. But I do think that everything Toranaga did from the very beginning, drink folks, was premeditated to accomplish this end goal. And
yes,
I think that one of his tools is portraying himself as this benevolent overlord, this kind and caring person. But the reality is, he is going to accomplish his goal, and it doesn't matter who he has to sacrifice.
Hatsumoto.
Yeah. That was his advisor, right?
His old buddy. He's just
who'd been with him since he was 12 years old.
Yep.
And he had his time to die. And it's everyone's expendable except for Toranaga. And everyone is a tool. And even the reveal about his feelings towards Blackthorn, and again, this is very spoilery, but Toranaga is having a conversation with Yabu, and he talks about the engine, about Blackthorn, and he's like, it's not that I need him to survive. My banner would be fine without the engine. I keep him around because he makes me laugh. And it's oh my god, thinking back on all of the gifts that he bestowed on Blackthorn, giving this barbarian samurai swords was just an agent of chaos. It's oh, well, I can appreciate that. So he kept Blackthorn around for his own amusement. It's no other human life has value.
I mean, he does say that in the book too. But I think there's a little bit more to it, because what's the other thing that he says?
Why tell a dead man the future?
Well, no. So
poor
and then
Yabu.
He gives a little smirk, and
when Yabu says, why do you keep doing this? How do you shape the wind, right? To do your will, basically. And he goes back to...
He's it's easy. I just swipe up on the thumb pad.
he goes back to... Yes, it goes to Tsushima. He goes back to one of the first things that Blackthorn said to him, He's like, why do you keep warring against the Portuguese when it's one man against this whole religion?
When it's pointless.
Yep.
When it's pointless. And he says, yeah, unless I win. And that was like, that like struck the deepest chord, I think,
He
with
understood him.
Toranaga's
Yep.
being. And saw him, sure, he amuses him, and it's this whole fish out of water trying to play at being a Japanese person, even though he's a barbarian. It's he sees, though, that he is a like soul in that he's going to do whatever it takes to win, and that end goal is what's most important.
And John saves him twice. 2 times
Yes.
he winds up, because Toranaga would have died when they were escaping, if not for John having a hissy fit.
And then from the
And then the earthquake, he digs him out. And I think the only answer that we could ever get to the true intention is that if there is season 2,
there is.
There is.
2 and 3.
the question then is going to be, what does he do with the Emperor? If he allows the Emperor to take the throne,
Yeah.
okay, then you know your answer one way. If he finds a way to block the Emperor from doing that, then you know your other.
Yeah.
But that is going to be the answer.
I need a clarification on Japanese culture. You've referred to the heir multiple times as the emperor, but he was the heir to
he's not the-
Taiko, who
yes.
was like the supreme military. There's
Yeah.
still an emperor in Japan, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
But,
It's separate.
Yep. And at that time, even at that time, it was more of a figurehead, wasn't it?
Yes. I mean, it's always basically been a
Political figurehead. So the Taiko is essentially their president, is what he was. And the question winds up being is like, it's interesting because with how they work, their president, it's lineage. So that will be the answer. What does he do with the heir? And then you'll know in his heart of hearts how he feels.
The
Well,
heir is going to die, right? Like, now let's move on to our
Good
thoughts
question.
and concerns.
I
heading
think
into
it's
season
less that
2.
he's going to die and more so that there's going to be some sort of...
Unfortunate accident.
Not, I wouldn't even say that. It's
Conflict.
just... So the way that he puts it, the way that Toranaga puts it at the end of the book is that at some point they will make a mistake, and then that is when like they will fall out of favor, and then I can become Shogun, because that is his goal, is to be the Shogun, because he believes his vision for Japan is the only path forward for the country to be as good as it can be.
Does that make Toranaga a bad guy? Does that make him an antagonist?
I don't think so, because I think what it does is he's the person that he feels like he's the person that the country needs. And so he's the one that's going to lead it out of this constant infighting war that's happening for, centuries at this point. And he's going to try to get it past that. Like, that's his whole vision for like the future of Japan. And that was what drove Tokugawa, is the same type of thing. It isn't to try to, lord that power over others. It's to try to get it. I think, how I read it or how I've always understood it is it's try to get it, to break it out of this cycle. The breaker of chains, the breaker of the wheel, is what he's trying to do.
And I see what you're saying, and like, I love the character portrayal of Toranaga, so I want to believe that you're right and that he's going to be a kind and benevolent ruler, but history would suggest that if someone puts their vision above the vision of all others and is willing to stop at nothing to accomplish that, traditionally, they're not great people.
Not necessarily, though.
Toranaga chose to do it with the least amount of bloodshed that he could. He chose that route. And I think that gives us a little bit of an idea of his character. But I can see what you're talking about. There are shades of Thanos to him. I have a vision. I think my vision is right, and I'm going to go after my vision. Thanos' vision maybe wasn't totally wrong in certain ways. He's like, look, resources are finite. The population will wind up killing us. And he talks about the places where he had gone, how populations are thriving. What he did in certain areas, though atrocious, created benefit, which is wild. But that's why he's one of the great villains.
Yeah, Brian and I are both on Team Thanos.
Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what they do in season 2 with it. I'm concerned because they're losing the source material.
Yep.
So they had to sort of play to try to curry favor to these 2 masters, like I mentioned before, but now they're down to just the one. And as history has shown us, Game of Thrones was a fantastic show until they ran out of books and they ran out of that one master. And when it came down to just them looking at what they were going to do with the story, it started to falter. And so that's the one thing that I am a little bit concerned about with the season 2 and 3.
Because Brian called the book a masterpiece. I assume you're writing the same camp.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal book.
The source material is phenomenal. Well, great. I was already hesitant on if I want to go into season 2 on this show because the last third of this show was very oppressive, and like it's Blackthorn and his relationships that are the most compelling element. And like if he's not building the relationships with individual people, or if he's not warring against Portugal, I don't know how interested I am in the future of Shogun.
I think though the last 3 episodes are so heavy though because Toranaga said that he had to convince them that he had given up, right? So like that energy.
There's a lot of sacrifice.
Oh my! It permeates everything. He gives. People are dying. He is giving up in so many different ways. The way that he handles those that are close to him, the deaths that are involved. I mean, it is heavy, heavy stuff. I think that now that ruse has been ended, I think it would be returning more to maybe what we saw more in the earlier episodes. But I feel like he had to push it to such a degree because all those people are like, oh no, he's planning it. He's not giving up. But it isn't until they have to sit down and he's sacrificing those that are close to him that people are like, oh, wait a minute, maybe he has lost it.
The night is always darkest before the dawn. And that's like those last few episodes are that. It's like this bleakness. You have, Mariko's death. That was all part of the grand plan. Everything is seeming like it's falling apart. Toranaga seems like he's given up to all of his confidants except for the closest ones that don't really believe it. And so, but I feel like season 2 is probably going to have to be, a lot of it's going to be the actual like war and battles between everything, to see how that all plays out.
Because Ishido's dealt with by the end of the book.
Well, yes, but I think they're going to play that out. So, like, the end of the series, it's him sort of saying what he thinks is going to happen to Yabu. And, that's not going to play out exactly as he plans, per se. But I think like the first half of the season will probably be about that. And how that develops and how he takes advantage of some of those situations, how he convinces Ochiba to, not support Ishido and hang him out to dry. And then I think after that, then it's all about sort of picking up the pieces and how do you sort of form that new vision for Japan after that. So it'll be interesting to see. They do at least have the history to lean on. And since these characters are based off of that, they can still sort of pull from that to put that together. It's just they didn't have to do that with the first season, so I'm concerned about how they pick the right things.
The
to
narrative
do in the second
built
season.
around those events was just so intricate and elaborate, and is a deft touch to do all that.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you can just replicate that. That's really hard to do, right?
Yeah.
And this season, we talked about how rich some of the characters were. A lot of them are gone. Like, do we want another 10 hours without Yabu? Like,
or Mariko.
Tom's done. Second Yabu's head came off, Tom's like, nope.
Yeah, I mean, it was more Mariko for me, but like, and like the advisor whose name constantly escapes me. Like,
Omi?
The dude who was with them since he was a kid.
I can't remember his name. Is Hideyoshi or something like that, but yes.
Yeah, so like a lot of these rich characters that we love are gone. Like, are they going to be able to make...
it's not that either. It's somewhere around there, but yes.
Are they going to be able to fill the void with new characters that are as rich and compelling as the people that we meet early on in this series?
Yeah, I mean, I would assume they will. It's going to be interesting to see how they pull it all together. It's definitely a much more difficult task than writing for the first season was.
So it sounds like the official Outside is Overrated recommendation is grok season 1 in fullness. Make it into a nice stew, eat it, enjoy it for the masterpiece that it is, and then take a wait-and-see approach on the rest of the series before you invest the additional time in it.
I mean, I'm going to watch it when it comes out because I just want to see where it goes. I'm just trepidatious about how they're going to be able to actually be able to pull it off.
History has shown that it usually doesn't work out.
Yep.
I mean, can we think of a time where they got away from the source material and it did?
I mean, I don't think there's a lot of instances of that.
I can't think of one.
Past it, right?
I mean, the only comparison I can think of is Game of Thrones. So
yeah,
and Thrones just became so black and it was a series based off of Grey.
Yeah,
and it became so black and white at the end that it became predictable, and that's what killed it. Do you guys want to quick cover our favorite scenes? Like everybody, like pick 2.
I mean, I just have one that I want to talk about.
Okay.
And that's the only reason why I added that bit in there.
Oh, no, there's this. Thank you for putting this in, because
Yeah.
there's two that popped in my head right away.
My favorite scene of this series is when I think her name is Gin is out. She's Gyoko in the book. The courtesan that's in charge of the place.
The old whore, as she calls herself.
Yeah. The scene where she's out looking at the plot of land and she's super happy, and then that's where they put the church is right next to where the courtesans are.
Look, and who are your neighbors?
And then the father's realization with that is it's so great. It is so funny, and it was needed at that point, because that was like some of the darkest parts of the show. I loved that scene.
And what was the courtesan's name again?
Kiku, yeah.
No, not her, the boss one.
Gin.
I thought it was masterfully done in the show where Gin approaches Toranaga while he's in his darkest hour, while he's convincing everyone that he's given up and he's sacrificing all those people closest to him. She approaches him and she's like, how could this enemy army sneak up on you? It's like such a simple, elementary mistake. Like, she's the only one who had tangible proof to see through the ruse, to give us, the viewers, hope that there's something more than Toranaga just giving up.
Yep.
But just how sharp she was to be aware of this thing that nobody else noticed. I thought that was a really masterful element in the storytelling.
Yeah.
And it creates more grave for Toranaga, because if we do want to view him a little bit more as a villain, there are benevolent moments. Like, she lays out going, look, we need a purpose. There's a time for us where we put all this time in. We have these skills. Our beauty and our youth leaves us, and we're left with nothing. And we need something. We just need something. And he's like, okay, we'll give you a place where you can continue to exist, where your little chunk of society can kind of further go on past that crescendo and where everything just goes downhill. It's a place to continue for you.
But I feel like he only does that because she sees him. Like, she sees him for who he is, and she has this grander vision too. And so I think that's the one thing that you can look at, where if Toranaga's whole thing is to create this grander version of Japan that's as good as it can be, all of these people that he's sort of like pulling into his fold are the people that like he finds out are like wanting that. And sure, he sacrifices Mariko, but she wanted that.
She did.
And he gave her the best opportunity to destroy those that destroyed her family, to do that. And so, there's really, and Yabu dug his own grave. He was going to do it regardless. And so there's not a lot of people that he actually like sacrificed just like, out of sheer like expendable die kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And like, logical side of my brain agrees with you totally, but like the Tom side of my brain says you don't waste human life, like you don't expend it needlessly at any point. And so like, I really struggled with this show, with the Japanese culture embracing death at like every opportunity. It's like, it was very hard for me to digest the show.
And what appears to be it's a small hurdle to reach death in a lot of cases. It doesn't take a lot for them to go, okay, kill yourself and kill your children. It's like, okay.
One of my favorite scenes revolves along this similar thread. Like, Mariko is sacrificing herself to position Toranaga politically, basically. And the way that it plays out is she is going to have to stab herself in the heart with a dagger because she's not allowed to leave Osaka, and so she can't follow her liege lord. And so she is a Christian, she is a Catholic, and according to Catholicism, suicide is a mortal sin. So if she commits this act of ending her own life, she is going to hell, and that is a major issue for her. And so she asks for a Christian second to take her head so that she doesn't actually commit suicide. She dies as she has to, but she doesn't wield the blade, which saves her eternal soul. That second doesn't show up, and so she's about to kill herself, condemn her immortal soul, and it's Blackthorn who steps in, and even though he's in love with her, he is willing to be the one that takes her life so that she doesn't have to condemn her own soul. I thought that was a really powerful scene, and like the culmination of their relationship. Everything that, all the will they or won't they that they were building through the entire show, culminated in that moment. And like, that's Blackthorn's character, the strength of his character, that he was willing to step in to do something that he despised for the person that he loved.
And then carrying forward from that, like another scene that's like really great is when he's talking to the father after that, and the father says, well, don't worry, I heard her confession. and like Blackthorn knows she kind of sinned after that, because
she had absolution.
They did the nasty, so he's like, well, I hope that what I said helps too. It's like this subtext that's behind that, and you can kind of see that underneath it. That was something that jumped out to me with that second time through that.
And those two bond in that moment.
They do.
He's like, I think Mariko would be happy to see us being so civil with one another.
Yep.
The two for me, drinking with Buntero when Buntero first comes back, and he's like, "This is how we drink," and they're drinking out of bowls, and they just get hammered.
Yeah.
And then Buntero starts to show his ability with a bow, and he is just a different level of warrior and almost like a machine with how close he's fighting to Mariko, and that part was just wild to me.
How different would the end of the show have been if like he was just a little bit off and like that's the end of Mariko there? Like, that would have been it'd be interesting to see that alternate like storyline.
Well, my thought process was like, I wouldn't have chosen John Blackthorne to be my second because he doesn't really know what he's doing with that sword. And like they talked about with Toranaga, he's just like, yeah, you didn't even tell the story. It took me 9 hits. What a mess you made. He's like, who chooses a 12-year-old to be a second? But my other favorite was just the sheer destructive power of the cannon shots with the chains.
Yes.
When they fire those chains into those samurai, it is a pink mist.
Yeah.
And the practical effects they did to show these men shredded, crawling across their own bodies was, oh my God, was that powerful.
Well, because they talked about it, how they had people wear, like, basically they had them all attached to harnesses to pull them in different directions. And then they would put, like, the green suit on parts of their body that were going to get, like, edited out so that the other parts were just flailing as the stunt people got pulled back. It's really, they do go into a little bit of detail in one of the behind the scenes of that too. It's pretty cool. Like all of the stuff that they put, all the thought that they put into everything, which should make me feel like it's in good hands for what they're going to try to do with the more original stuff of seasons 2 and 3. And so I don't know. I don't know. The more I talk about it, maybe I'm getting a little more optimistic. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have all the resources to create something.
And that's true, yeah.
But they're not going to have Clavell's characters.
Correct. Well, they'll have them, but they'll have to... They won't have the situations that Clavell had created, right?
It's tricky because Rings of Power shows you, like, what you can do with a crazy, crazy budget, but it may not have the soul that you want, right? That's the thing. We can do anything we want to create a high gloss, but that doesn't give it depth.
I don't know, I still like season. I haven't watched season 2 yet, but I still liked season 1 of Rings of Power.
Kelsey and I, for what it is, we've absolutely enjoyed it. I don't think it's as landmark as the movies in any stretch or form, but there's a place for it.
Yeah.
But then there's other things that you'll watch. It's just like, you spent money on this?
Movies were also based on books. Like, they were a great adaptation of the source material, where Rings of Power was based on appendixes for a book. Not the same,
right? And there isn't. They don't have the information. They're making leaps to try to connect the dots, but there was nothing there to take it.
Yeah, at least Tolkien put in the appendix that like all the females had to have like huge boobs. So he set us up that way.
Yeah, his hentai phase was weird.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to say about Shogun, the FX series?
It was really good.
Yeah.
For a guy that sometimes I struggle between books and movies. There's only a couple of times that they've both been some of my favorites. I love Jurassic Park in different ways, both the book and the film.
Ready Player One for me.
I haven't read that book, but that's on my
phenomenal.
list. Okay. I love Ready Player One as a movie though, so maybe I should read the book. But it's
separate and different things.
Yeah, it is. It's sometimes hard to have a love for both, and I think that Shogun, the FX series, when I heard it was coming out, I was super stoked. And then once I was about 5 episodes in, I was like, oh, they really did care about this. But to know now what they did just to get the Japanese done, all the filters that ran through, the expense of that, they had a vision.
Yep.
Bry Guy, is Shogun a masterpiece? Shogun the show on FX season 1.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, here's the deal. If I had to give it a scale out of 100, right, I would give it a solid 80 something. It's something I would definitely recommend to people.
85 maybe?
Maybe. I've watched it twice. I enjoyed both watch throughs, but I don't see it as something I'm going to come back to every so many years. Lord of the Rings is like, say, a film. I will watch that once a year for the rest of my life, and that's
Well, if you watch the whole trilogy, that's basically Shogun.
well, you know, and,
10 hours apiece.
but then The Hobbit exists, so then you can tell that some things weren't taken with the same amount of caring. So it just kind of depends.
I think that Peter Jackson should get hit in the dick once for each Hobbit film by everyone who had to endure it.
Line up.
Bernsey, your final thoughts on Shogun, and is season 1 a masterpiece?
I think it's phenomenal. It's not probably my favorite TV series of all time, but it's still really good. And as a fan of the book, it was really great to see that come to life. I don't know, maybe with seasons 2 and 3, they take it to another level. It'd be interesting to see if they could pull that off. One other thing I wanted to throw out there, and I should have said this probably before we cut out with the spoilers, but if you really don't want to read subtitles, they do on Hulu have a dubbed version. I haven't tried watching it because I'm fine with reading the subtitles, but they do have a dubbed version that you can watch instead that will then have voiceover over all the Japanese if that's a hindrance for watching the show.
I'm glad that you brought that up, and I agree. I wish we had talked about this earlier, but I have always found subtitles to be the most frustrating thing because, like, if there are words on the screen, like, I am reading a thing. I'm not
And you
watching
can miss what's
thing.
happening above. Yeah.
I did not have that issue with this. I don't know if it's because it's the longest thing I've ever watched with subtitles, and I just got into the flow of absorbing.
I think your brain shuts
both.
off after a bit. It's interesting, though, because in the 80s version, anytime Japanese was spoken, there was no subtitles. They wanted you to feel like a stranger in a strange land. They did not want you to know what they were saying or understand. Maybe you could kind of guess by physical context, but it was fascinating how that was a big shift between the two.
Yeah.
And I loved how they handled the translations and the shifting languages. I thought they portrayed that really well.
I think because the show isn't so dialogue dense all the time, it's not like they're talking for like the entire episode. There's enough time, I think, in between what's said and to like take in what's going on in the scene. And then I don't know. I think that helps a lot. There isn't like somebody that's going on a monologue like I do in the episodes.
I eat. On the Ghost of Tsushima, I saw Joe wind up on a thought, and I love how you speak because you do speak eloquently and detailed. I ate half of my buffalo chicken garlic parmesan bites. I muted myself. I knew I was going to get half that bowl done. I'm like, Joe's on a roll, and just ate.
Ryan, it's fascinating to me how often you eat on the show. You're literally the only person involved with OiO that eats like while the mics are on.
You said it a lot of the times around my eating times. I'm very specific when I eat.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize for...
No, not at all. I'm going to continue to eat as long as I mute. It works.
He's the Brad Pitt of OiO.
Brad Pitt eats while he films things?
So yeah, that's like a thing with Brad Pitt is he's eating in like a lot of scenes that he's in movies.
Never noticed that.
Yeah, it happens. It's certain characters, so especially his character in like the Ocean's 11 series, he's like always eating something in every scene that he's in. There's other movies that's permeated into a little bit also.
Well, speaking of Brad Pitt, we're moving on from Samurai to Max for our next round of content. For the next 2 months, our game club is playing Armored Core 5 Fires of the Rubicon. On the main show, John, Brian, and I next month are going to break down the mech movie Macross What Is Love? Did I get that subtitle right? Macross. Drink. Yep. Macross. Is it What Is Love or it's
Baby, don't hurt me.
Yeah, it is. It is What Is Love, and it's based for all of us that are like our 40s. We grew up with like Toonami and Robotech. It's Robotech. That's what it is.
I don't know what a Robotech is.
You. If I showed you some videos of it, you might know. We're not. Just cut the mic. He's not going to stop.
You weren't doing it like a cat, though.
No, I was
meow,
trying
meow,
to...
meow, 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 meow.
I was more so thinking of like Night at the Roxbury.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I got into. So
it's a good jam. So we're doing Armored Core 5 Fires of the Rubicon for Game Pass over the next 2 months after we wrap
6.
6.
That's a drink.
Yeah, 6. So by the time you hear this on February 1st, we'll do Ghost of Tsushima Part 2 in February Game Club. March and April are both Armored Core 6 Fires of the Rubicon. We invite all of our Patreon supporters to join in on those discussions. On the main show, we're doing Macross What Is Love in March, and then the April show is going to focus on digital board games, including Scythe, which has mechs in it. That's a great connection, right, Burns?
It works, yeah.
It plays.
Yeah.
Braga, you excited to play a bunch of digital board games or what? Like, you're a good sport. You play a lot of physical board games.
I am here to be with my friends and talk about stuff we like. So there are situations you guys put me into I'm guaranteed to fail. Like Borderlands, we all know what happened there. But
Some people might be new. Samurai might bring in a new audience. So.
We'll see. We will see how this goes.
We did a show on Borderlands. One of the things we were talking about was Tales of the Borderlands, and you didn't really play it. And I started asking you questions, and
I made it super clear that I had reached a point of no return and did not go back to it. I even played it altered, and it didn't work. So that's how bad that game was.
I just want to say, we didn't bring it up this time. You did.
I did.
So there you go.
I did. And it continues per episode I'm on, but this time it was me.
Casey has thumbs and buttholes. You have Tales from the Borderlands.
I'll take mine over Casey's. Give no background to Casey's and just keep going.
We all have a cross that we have to bear for Outside is Overrated. But digital board games, Brian, have you ever played a board game in a digital format, on Steam?
Yeah, I played when I was first in grad school, and my D&T, Dungeons and Dragons group wound up being all over the country. We played on Fantasy Grounds, so we played Dungeons and Dragons on a online format, which was very rudimentary at that time, but that was kind of my first introduction to that. So I have. It's a little bit different because obviously that one is kind of more, they just give you the tool set and you kind of do with it as you want.
And D&D is more narratively based, where board games are more fiddly bit based.
Yeah.
That's the technical term, fiddly bit.
Fiddly bit. Okay, that's good.
Tiddlywinks.
Yeah. So we got some great content coming up around Max. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Outside is Overrated. Please review us on your favorite podcast platform and support our show on Patreon at patreon.com/OiO. That's patreon.com/OiO. You can back the show for as little as $2 a month. For Joey, the Hobbybox Burns at Hobbybox Burns, and for Brian, I'm Tom Sidlogic at Tom Sidlogic OiO. We'll talk to you next month. Stay inside, kids.